Throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, there have been many prophecies, as well as stories, usually quite ancient, that serve as foreshadowing. So we have a couple of different ways of George letting us know what's going to happen and or letting the characters know what's going to happen through a bit of mystery. On top of that, there's history books, scholarly sources and texts referring to some of those same prophecies or stories, and sometimes they contain different information. Some sources differ on which prophesied outcomes are actually good or evil or something else altogether, something outside of the good-evil paradigm even. Some sources wonder if what we've been told from thousands of years ago is actually true. It's fun and exciting and mysterious and mystical, and there's a little bit of anxiety behind it too, but it's also pretty much impossible to keep track of it all, even for us doing this full time. For example, what does Melisandre believe versus what does Quaithe believe? How does Bran's knowledge and that of past Green Tears and the Weirwood Network stack up against that of Marwyn or Makoro or Rhaegar or any of the other characters I just mentioned? Even the sources themselves don't have it all, right? The Weirwood Network doesn't have all the answers, nor do the books in Ashai. Certainly no individual does. The story of the last hero refers to others, the Long Night, the children, the Night's Watch, but there's no dragons in that story. The story of Azor Ahai mentions a great cold darkness. It mentions dragons waking from stone. It mentions a red sword of heroes. There's no mention of the others in that one, though. Melisandre is perhaps the character most focused on all this, but she doesn't even know Daenerys exists, right? Dany, meanwhile, has been trying to figure out some of these things on her own. But so far, she hasn't made a lot of progress. When she left the House of the Undying, she said, well, I came for answers, and now I have even more questions. And us too. But she has seen and heard a lot along the way for us to consider. And given we have more information she does, we're able to come to more conclusions than she has. And now, in her case, it's dreams, the House of the Undying, from people. Consider that, again, alongside what Bran has seen, or what Quaithe has said, or again, Rhaegar, or Bloodraven, or Aerys I, who is very bookish and interested in prophecies, or Old Nan. And it's not just what they know, it's what they think they know. George isn't giving these characters precise, detailed information. They just know things that they think are true or suspect are true, and they may not be right. Also, Sam has read a lot of books, and he hasn't actually told us what's in some of those books he's read. It hasn't been a part of his POVs, and now that he's at the Citadel, there's going to be a lot more of that, you might think. And Maester Aemon, another scholarly individual who also comes at it from a supernatural angle, being Targaryen himself. He spent a lot of his life worrying over this. And throughout the whole thing, we have the disparate ways this knowledge is circulated or learned. These characters I've just named, they're not going to meet at some conclave to discuss it all. They can't, really. But we can. We can put all these scraps and scrolls together in one place, all the relevant lore from recently to all the way back as far as A Song of Ice and Fire history will take us. So this episode is a collection of all we know about all the prophecies and relevant ancient tales. Which stories refer to the others? Which prophecies refer to dragons? Do any refer to both? Each believer, each religion, each prophecy, each text, they're all different in ways that George has spiced with realistic information handling. We're going to try to get at every source we have. Again, no one has all the answers. No one is even particularly close to having all the answers as far as we can tell. There may not even be all the answers. I don't think George has conceived it that way. I think even the way he imagines it, there are some things that will never be answered. Even he won't come up with the answers for it because he intends for it to be mysterious. So why would he come up with something, right? It's even mysterious to him in that sense. Now, some people, meaning some characters, have their heads buried deep in prophecy while also having their heads buried deep in the sand. They know a lot, but they're also ignorant a lot or in denial about a lot. Some people are partly enlightened. They're on the right track, but they're also wrong about things. So this is something we will pay attention to today in great detail. Not just which prophecies, dreams, and books, which characters have that knowledge, and who they may discuss or help fill out the picture using each other's knowledge. No one has read all the same books, right? Or had the same dreams. In fact, they rarely do. It's a large and very old world we're dealing with here. On top of all this, as a way to frame everything we're on with the subject, brings us back to the title of this episode. The concept of the Song of Ice and Fire itself. It seems to somewhat serve as a catch-all for these story elements, these supernatural elements, these prophetic elements, these foreshadowy elements. But also more than that. There's also all kinds of Song of Ice and Fire themes that we'll touch on a little bit because they help us understand the bigger picture and how George uses the concept of ice and fire in his prophecies and stories and all that. And again, there's misleading takes, outright lies, honest mistakes. I mean, something true 1,000 years ago might not be true today, right? And we're not talking about 1,000 years here. We're talking about more than that. Songs are a big part of this episode as well, as I've said, because we're going to delve into the Song of Ice and Fire conceptually, as well as what it means within the confines of the story. Songs are very memorable, not just from what we can learn from them, but because of the nature of music, something we'll spend a little bit of time on today as well. It helps explain why, after so long, Westeros is able to remember these things. Songs contain stories. They contain characters. They contain memories. So we've got the princess that was promised. The prince that was promised as well. Azor Ahai, the last hero, dragon dreamers and the rebirth of dragons. The comet, the others, the long night, green seers, and ice and fire themes outside the supernatural. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of History of Westeros podcast coming at you. It's Sunday at 3 Eastern, which is when we are live most of the time. We hope you catch us live, but if you can't, you can catch us afterwards. The video is available on Spotify a week later, and the podcast version is also available at that same time on any platform you listen to podcasts, and it's edited in that format. We leave the live stream version as is. Shea edits the Spotify and audio-only version, so they're a little cleaner, sound a little better. But the live experience allows you to interact with us and your fellow historians and talk to, engage with comments and discussions live in that. So there's a little trade-off either way. We hope you are able to take advantage of whichever one you prefer. Shout out to our good friend Nina. Her blog is still over at goodqueenalley.tumblr.com, 1L in alley. The latest blog post over there is a question about what the Stark and Tully Bannermen, how they would have reacted to hearing about the Frey-Stark marriage pact that happened early on. We don't really get that reaction. It just happens and the war continues, but we don't get a take from a lot of the lords and lesser folks on how they reacted to that. It may not have been so positive. So you'll want to check out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com to see what she says about that. If you have questions for us, hit us up at westeroshistory@gmail.com, unless you're here live, in which case you can hit us with questions live and discuss them with your fellow Westorians. But Ashea and I have questions for you. We have a survey that we would love for you to take. The link is in the description. I'm sure we've posted it other places as well. You can find it in our Facebook group.
You can also just say it, bit.ly/how-survey.
Good point. Nice, easy to remember, bit.ly/how-survey. And we would really appreciate if you took it. It's going to help us understand the direction of our content a little bit, what y'all want from us from places outside of just our episodes, like on social media. Lots of different things like that. A chance for you to give us feedback, weigh in on a number of different things. Won't take you very long, and we would very much appreciate it if we could get that feedback from you. It's very valuable data for us, and it's just something we like to see. We love to see what y'all think.
And there's an optional raffle at the end. You can choose to enter your email address for a chance to win some History of Westeros stickers if you're in the U.S., or a month at our Archmaester patron level if you're international.
That's right. Hit it up, and we look forward to your responses, my friends. Our trivia question today: who does Dany discuss the Song of Ice and Fire with? The phrase is very rarely used in the books, but she does bring it up to talk to one person about it. Who is that? The answer I will give you at the end, but it's also within the confines of this episode. It will come up. Let me read the sections that we'll be discussing today. After the little setup, we will discuss what is the Song of Ice and Fire. Then we will get into the Ice and Fire prophecy timeline, a perspective of Ice and Fire. Then Azor Ahai and Friends, the Great Other, the Last Hero, the Princess that was promised, Songs and Memory, Aegon's dream. That's right, Aegon the Conqueror's dream. That did come from George, not just from House of the Dragon, so that's involved here too. The Dragon Dreamer soundtrack, then sheet music, then the three-headed dragon, then the others, ? And an outro, and we'll be done. Let me also hit you all with a poll. We'll give you the results at the end. Those of you who are here live can weigh in. The poll question is, it's just a simple yes or no answer. When Dany sees that singular vision of her brother Rhaegar, he plays his harp. The music lingers. She hears the music in this vision, and even as the vision fades, the music remains for a little while longer. It lingers. Will Dany ever hear that song again, in a vision or otherwise? Yes or no? Weigh in, and we'll give you the results at the end of the episode, along with some other episodes that relate to this one, if you want to stay immersed. Let's go. What is the Song of Ice and Fire? The title of the series is A Song of Ice and Fire, but we're introduced to the Song of Ice and Fire within the story itself. Only once, though, as I hinted. And I think it can be looked at similarly. The A Song of Ice and Fire versus the Song of Ice and Fire. There's a difference there. There's some nuance. Song is a fitting metaphor as it can blend ideas and themes and stories, right? Songs are able to weave a lot of different things at once while also being memorable, emotional, etc. It's a great way to represent so many plot lines while pointing towards a climactic, prophesied, foreshadowed showdown. I don't want to say prophesied climax because this story might be too big to denote a single climax. Maybe it won't be, but we don't know yet. I would guess no. I guess there's a lot of climactic events in the final, and even before the final words are written. The House of the Undying, of all places, is where the Song of Ice and Fire is first stated out loud within the books. This vision doesn't indicate that the warlocks necessarily have this information, but the magic of this place and the shade of the evening brings it out of her, or, well, we don't know the mechanism of how this magic works. Either way, let's get into what she sees. Here's Rhaegar and Elia. Quote,
"The man had her brother's hair, but he was taller, and his eyes were a dark indigo rather than lilac.
Aegon,"
he said to a woman nursing a newborn babe in a great wooden bed.
"What better name for a king?"
"Will you make a song for him?" the woman asked.
"He has a song,"
the man replied.
"He is the prince that was promised, and his is the Song of Ice and Fire."
He looked up when he said it, and his eyes met Dany's, and it seemed as if he saw her standing there beyond the door.
"There must be one more,"
he said, though whether he was speaking to her or the woman in the bed, she could not say.
"The dragon has 3 heads." The dragon has 3 heads.
He went to the window seat, picked up a harp, and ran his fingers lightly over its silvery strings. Sweet sadness filled the room as man and wife and babe faded like the morning mist, only the music lingering behind to speed her on her way.
Just in general, the use of the word song here is curious. Why does Rhaegar say it like that? Again, we don't have anything else to compare it to. No one else uses the phrase except Dany in reference to this moment. She's like, what happened? What did he mean? So she's basically asking the same question I'm asking right now. What does that mean? What is the Song of Ice and Fire? Is it just a turn of a phrase? Because he's a musical guy and he perceives it musically. He writes songs for people. He's holding his harp in there. It's a big part of his character. Does he mean it like a story? Like, his is the Song of Ice and Fire. His is the story of Ice and Fire. He is the prophesied individual. He is a child of destiny. Is that just how he just calls that a song? Because it's a similar metaphor? Or is there more to it? Is his song his destiny? Is it like his whole story? This character, this son of his who he believes has that destiny. Ilya asks if he would write a song for this child, for this boy, this newborn. Apparently that's something he does, because, she wouldn't ask that otherwise. I guess he wrote a song for Rhaenys. Maybe for her, Ilya as well. Maybe for some other people in his life. Maybe his mother, So, given that, it's tricky to gauge Rhaegar's response here. Not just because this is a vision and not an actual thing that Rhaegar definitely said. I'm guessing he did. I'm guessing Dany is seeing something that really happened. But even that, we can't be 100% on that even though, can we? And I'm not sure Rhaegar's answer here is, nah, I'm not writing a song for this kid because he's already got one. So in that sense, it's not a metaphor. He's literally referring to a song that he isn't going to write for this kid because he already has a metaphorical song. So that's tricky, right? He's not going to write a literal song because he has a metaphorical song. Nah. Yeah, so you can understand why Dany's confused by this and why we're confused by this. And the idea that Rhaegar seems to be looking at her or through the doorway that's a creepy way or intriguing way to conceive of this is maybe Rhaegar was seeing her when this really happened. Like he was a dreamy guy. Maybe he had dreams as well. I mean, we know he read about prophecy. We don't hear anything about dreams or anything supernatural there with him, only interpretations of it, but it's definitely possible that he had some dreams. I mean, it's not uncommon for Targaryens, right? So that would be something if she's seeing him and 20 years prior, he saw a vision of her when he's saying there must be one more. He, at the time, would have probably perceived that as his next child, as the Visenya that's missing from the Rhaenys, Aegon, Visenya three-headed combo that he's referring to here. So he may have seen a vision of Dany and thought, that's my Visenya that we're going to have next. Dany, of course, has no idea about that. But she can hear the conversation, and she may eventually be able to piece that together. She certainly understands some of this stuff on a very basic level. She understands. She knows who Aegon the Conqueror was. She knows he had 2 sisters. She knows about their 3 dragons. So the only other time the phrase "A Song of Ice and Fire" is used, as I said, is when Dany brings it up and asks Jorah what it means. And of course, Jorah has no idea what that means. He's like, I don't know what the Song of Ice and Fire means. I've never heard that song. He does help her verify, though, that the person in the dream is Rhaegar. She wasn't sure when she tells him about the harp with silver strings. Jorah's like, damn, yeah, that's pretty conclusive there. He did have a harp like that. And Dany never knew that, never saw that. She never met Rhaegar. So Jorah's got to be a little spooked by that because it's so accurate. But neither of them know what else to make of it beyond that. And the phrase, the dragon has 3 heads, there must be one more. That's a huge statement. Like, we're going to have to cover that separately in this episode, mind you, but we'll come back to that. But it's very curious. Like, is that part of what he read? The 3 heads thing? Or is that something he dreamed also? So yeah, that's why we'll come back to it. So I think the Song of Ice and Fire is Rhaegar's interpretation of the destiny of the prince that was promised. Now, of course, he identified the wrong figure. He first thought it was himself. So did Aemon, by the way, Maester Aemon. Then he thought it was his own son. And, well, we don't know what he thought at the end. Like, we know what he was saying in this dream, but he didn't die right after that dream. He died, a year later, 9 months later? So there's time for him to rethink some things. We don't know what he thought, at the end there. But we know this, and it's a big deal. So we can see obvious themes with certain characters, and especially with supernatural elements. The book begins with the return of the others, the first book that is, in the snow and ice, and ends with the return of the dragons born on a pyre. So we got Ice and Fire bookending Game of Thrones book 1 right there. And of course, both of these events involve quite a few deaths. Dany also has those dreams of her ancestors pushing her towards her destiny. That's in book 1. That's in Game of Thrones when she's in her fever dream. She's had her complications with pregnancy and all that. And after the Mirri Maz Duur's ritual. So much later, though, we learn that actually a lot of her ancestors had dragon dreams. Not like hers exactly. because she's the actual mother of dragons, the one who actually fulfills the prophecy, whereas a lot of her ancestors were people who had dreams of dragons returning or vague things to do with dragons. Some of them may have thought they were the one. Some of them may have perceived that they were dreaming over someone else. Either way, dragon dreams are not uncommon up and down the family tree. And a few of her ancestors were like famous dreamers, like Dany's a dreamer explicitly. Like that's a name that all the Targaryens know, and they know why. I mean, she's the reason they all exist today, because without her, they'd have died in the Doom. So the dreams about bringing back the dragons may be purposeful. They may be designed. They may be implanted, glass candles, other means, for the purpose of stopping the others. You know who the savior of the world is. Well, you got to make sure the savior of the world knows that they're the savior of the world. They have to be convinced to do all those things, else everyone's going to die. Dany doesn't know she's Azor Ahai. Dany doesn't know she's the princess that was promised. And will she accept it if she does learn that? That's not exactly the purpose of this episode, but it's a great question to ask. Meanwhile, Bran has dreams too, after his fall, right? These dreams are mostly of what's to come, but they're also vague. He's also told ancient tales by Old Nan after he wakes back up. It's more important then to kind of put all that together, what's happening in his dreams and how that relates to what Old Nan is saying. So this isn't prophecy when Old Nan is telling it. This is more straight up literary foreshadowing. But the stories are so ancient and old, they kind of function like a prophecy because they're not straightforward like a prophecy. There's some language that's inexact. There's the likelihood of the corruption of the language over 8,000 or 6,000 years. The story's probably changed a little bit, if not a lot, after all that time. So we know that Bran is explicitly told by the Three-Eyed Crow, this is why you have to live. This is blah, 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 because winter is coming. We need you for that. That may be something like what's going on in the background with Dany. Different forces, different elements, an individual or two pushing her towards her destiny. Via prophecy, via vision, via ancient text. All the above and more. And even though I just described a Game of Thrones the way I did, it's really a Clash of Kings where the supernatural elements really take off. They're set up in a Game of Thrones, but they really flourish and become fuller in a Clash of Kings. It's the supernatural elements book. It starts with the comet. It's when we get truly introduced to red priests, shadow babies, skin changers. There's no prophecy in the first book. There's foreshadowing, right? There's Old Nan stories and there's some other things, but there's no prophecies until book 2. The House of the Undying is in book 2, and that's where Dany gets her vision that leads to her talking about the Song of Ice and Fire. So much of this is a Clash of Kings. George starts filling in the backstory of these returns. Like, why did the dragons come back? Why are the others back? It isn't just, here they are. Now we start to learn what led to that and all the backstory behind all of it. We had heard about the Long Night and the Last Hero, but not Lightbringer, not Azor Ahai, not Nissa, not the prince that was promised, not the significance of the comet, not Melisandre, not Quaithe, right? All these things come after book 1. So, given what we said about music and memory, which we'll come back to a little more, it's quite telling that George made Rhaegar such a key figure here, a musician, a songwriter, and a good one, someone very much known for his music. It's pretty much impossible to for an in-world character to think of Rhaegar and be ignorant of his musicianship. That's just something that's like very attached to his identity. So here's Dany ruminating on what she saw in the House of the Undying, which included hearing his song.
Dany could not let it go. His is the Song of Ice and Fire, my brother said. I'm certain it was my brother, not Viserys. Rhaegar. He had a harp with silver strings. Ser Jorah's frown deepened until his eyebrows came together.
Prince Rhaegar played such a harp,
he conceded.
You saw him?
She nodded. There was a woman in a bed with a babe at her breast. My brother said the babe was the prince that was promised and told her to name him Aegon.
So Dany has the seed of a connection to her brother with regards to a destiny that she isn't quite clear on. Again, she doesn't know what he means by the Song of Ice and Fire. She doesn't know what the prince that was promised means. She could maybe guess that that's a prophetic individual, but she not only hasn't figured that out explicitly, she certainly hasn't connected it to herself. And Rhaegar seemed awfully confident in this dream here, right? So it's got to really make her wonder what he was thinking. She's like, my brother was really confident about these things. What was he on about? What is he talking about? But she really, not only does she want to know because it's this big deal, but that's her brother that she never knew. She yearns to understand what he was driven by. That's her family that she doesn't know or have much of a connection to at all. And it would be very meaningful, even though it might be tragic at the same time, for her to find out that she's on a similar path to her brother and is working on something that was important to him. And she will eventually realize probably that the prince that was promised, that Rhaegar kept expecting to come along, was her all along. She's like, oh my God, Rhaegar was looking for me. My brother was looking for me. She very likely will have that realization someday. You know, she's just hasn't gotten that very far down this path yet. A lot of the elements are there, but she hasn't really put them together or thought about them a whole lot explicitly, though she has thought about them somewhat, of course. But the problem is she just doesn't have much knowledge of her own family. Viserys didn't teach her very much. She was separated from House Targaryen very early, obviously, never knew her parents. Didn't get to read the books at Dragonstone, right? Just is missing a lot of her heritage from not being raised in that way. So the only person she can ask is Jorah, who Jorah doesn't know anything, right, about this kind of thing. Quote, Prince Aegon was Rhaegar's heir by Elia of Dorne,
Ser Jorah said.
But if he was this prince that was promised, the promise was broken along with his skull when the Lannisters dashed his head against a wall.
I remember, Dany said sadly. They murdered Rhaegar's daughter as well, the little princess. Rhaenys, she was named, like Aegon's sister. There was no Visenya, but he said the dragon has 3 heads. What is the Song of Ice and Fire?
It's no song I've ever heard.
I went to the warlocks hoping for answers, but instead they've left me with 100 new questions.
Yeah, true, right? Can't argue with that, Dany. We have a lot of the same questions. So Jorah, yeah, he only knows the basics. He knows a few things about Rhaegar. He knows a few things about these murdered princelings. He knows who Elia was. He knows Rhaegar played a harp. Yeah, but he doesn't know anything about the supernatural stuff. Not a whit. So she will get that education to some degree at some point. It's going to be interesting to see who she talks to first. If Makoro gets there first and starts filling her head with Red Priest stuff, it'll be very biased, right? It'll be not quite like Melisandre, but it'll be along that line. It'll be along that range because it'll be all filtered through the beliefs of a Red Priest, not taking all these other things into account. A Red Priest is going to dismiss the talk of the old gods or dismiss the talk of the Seven. Well, the Seven have nothing to do with any of this, but you know what I'm saying here. The problem with the Red Priests is they're not going to perceive anything outside of their worldview. They're going to make everything fit their worldview. Within everything they see has to be framed within that dualistic great other versus R'hllor paradigm. And anything else is a demon. It's either of R'hllor, of the great other, or it's just unnatural, you know, that's it. So that makes someone like him both interesting, compelling, but also highly flawed in a way that we've sort of experienced through Melisandre. Obviously, Makoro's a different person, but there's got to be some similarities there. They're both Red Priests. What if Marwyn gets there first? He's a supernatural maester type, but he's a maester. The key is maester. He has a different understanding of these things. He's not religious. He has an understanding of a lot of religions rather than being focused on one particular one. So it's super interesting. Who's going to talk to her first? Who might be able to undo some of the words? They might argue, right? I don't know. Marwyn could counter some of what Makoro says with hard facts, and Makoro can summon fire and show fire readings and be like, look, I've got real power here. This guy just has talk. So it's like, and that we've seen this play out with Stannis, like Davos versus Melisandre, or Melisandre versus any one of other Stannis' advisors. So then there she gets right back to having 100 questions again. She's like, you guys have brought me new information, but neither of you actually have answers. So on top of all this, that's Dany's only dream / vision of Rhaegar. She has nothing else there other than, maybe Barristan has said a few things about him, but they're not supernatural things. So for the rest of her arc, it's mostly Quaithe pushing her, right? Through a glass candle, probably, urging her towards her destiny, while the warlocks, who actually revealed so much of that destiny through the House of the Undying, are actually coming at her for revenge, or were, until Euron, like a proper pirate, not only stole all their stuff, but he stole their whole purpose, stole their revenge. So just a few quick lists that we're going to get deeper into as we move on here. Azor Ahai. Now, Ashay and I have long been proponents of there being multiple Azor Ahai figures. Though, to be fair, no one actually interpreting any of these prophecies says so. So we'll include those lines of thinking as we move forward. The prince and princess that was promised, very linked to Azor Ahai, as we'll explain. The last hero seems to be a different kind of figure, but there's a lot of overlap in the stories that are being told here versus the prophecies. And, of course, the dream of Aegon the Conqueror. Now, that's, again, George R. R. Martin brought that up. House of the Dragon did their own spin on it. So we have to be careful here. We should not be including the House of the Dragon elements. Only the stuff George said, and that's it, which is very limited. So we'll make sure to parse that when we get to it. And then there's a few other tidbits like the stallion who mounts the world. That's another prophecy that's minor, but still plays into this general pastiche of prophecies, all sort of pointing to some of the same things while lacking some of the elements of others. So most of these prophecies or stories end with some great cold northern darkness. The Long Night 2.0, the new Long Night, whatever you want to call it. Some of these are books, some of these are tales passed down, some of them are actual songs, some of them are histories, and there's histories in Westeros, there's histories all over the world of these alternate Azor Ahai personas. Each of them have a different version of how the Long Night was stopped. The Rhoynar example, very poignantly and very on topic here today, is said to have been a song that stopped it. And there's lots of different reasons given to us as to how it started, like the cause of the original Long Night, which can be looked at as potential foreshadowing for how the next one will happen. And of course, we're given details about the others and their origin in some places, but that's pretty limited. It's mostly not prophetic. It's mostly from text and from the Weirwood Network. And occasionally these terms are interchangeable. For example, Melisandre refers to the prince that was promised and Azor Ahai as the same thing. No one else does that. So that's an important detail. And of course, what isn't mentioned in some of these prophecies can be almost as big as what is mentioned. And that's important. So Dany has some inkling of what's going on. She doesn't know it's her, but she knows that there's prophecies. She knows that there's things happening. She just hasn't gotten very deep into it yet. Melisandre obviously does too. And she's told a lot of people. She's spread the word. Not everyone believes her, but quite a few people do. And of course, Stannis does. And that's a big one because Stannis' authority reaches a lot more people. But Arya, nothing to do with any of this, right? Not yet. Sansa? Nope. Theon? Nah. Cersei? Jaime? No. Tyrion barely, right? Tyrion hears Benero preach in front of the Red Temple at Volantis. It creeps him out. He sees Valyrian glyphs, doom, darkness, the eye of evil on Daenerys and all this stuff. It creeps him out. Bran knows some things, but what he knows is entirely different than what Quaithe knows, for example, and through different means. If only they could get together and talk about it all, but of course they can't. And Bran doesn't know anything about the prince that was promised. He's never heard the term Azor Ahai, right? So it's really neat seeing how these different pieces land in different places. So here's just let's do a quick list here of people who have either seen this, heard about it, read about it, or been told about it. First, with the ones who have seen it. And what I mean by seen it, I mean they've actually had visions, dreams, something supernatural. Aegon the Conqueror, the Ghost of High Heart, Dragon Dreamers. We don't know how many there are, but Dragon Dreamers pretty exclusively see the rebirth of dragons, among other things, but that's a very much a recurring thing. Maester Aemon supposedly has had dreams too, although maybe he's more properly put in the scholarly category here. Rhaegar as well, we're not sure if he really had dreams. Maybe it's just the books and the songs and the stuff for him. Maybe he had dreams. Dany definitely has had dreams. House of the Undying, she got Quaithe pushing her. She's got more people on her way to her to tell her things. But she's still pretty new to it. Bloodraven, we don't know exactly what he knows, but he's the three-eyed crow most likely and has been educating Bran on how to defeat the others and what the others are. He warned him through that first coma dream long ago, so he probably knows quite a bit. But even he may not know some of the Eastern stuff. He probably does. I mean, he lived with Shiera Seastar and they were studying magic, and it's unlikely they never encountered the Azor Ahai Prince that was promised prophecy. But so far he hasn't mentioned it. So maybe one day he'll bring that up to Bran, and that could be really interesting if these things start to merge. He himself is sort of a child of ice and fire given his Blackwood Targaryen heritage. So he's a little more, he's closer to the most knowledgeable potentially of all these characters. And of course he's bringing Bran along. And of course that doesn't even mention what other information is contained in the Werewood network, learned by people before Bloodraven, or children before Bloodraven. Long before, perhaps. Euron is someone we'll mention briefly in this episode, because maybe he had one of those crow dreams. Maybe he was seen as a potential green seer when he was young, and then they gave up on that idea. But he's also interesting because of all the characters that we're going to discuss today throughout this episode, Euron's the only one who might look at the prophecies and go, I want that to happen. I want the others to come. I want the wall to come down. I want the long night. Everyone else is like, I don't want that. We got to stop that. Or I hope that doesn't happen, because some people are completely powerless to do anything about it. But Euron might be like, yeah, let's do that. He's the only one that's like that, I think. Jojen is interesting because he's had all these green dreams, but they're more what's next for Bran type things. They're more focused on protecting Bran and getting Bran to where he needs to be. Jojen hasn't really had explicit dreams about the nature of the Song of Ice and Fire or about the others, or if he has, he hasn't said anything about it, right? So he's like, he's kind of, I'm not sure, what he actually knows and what his dreams have told him. His dreams are also very steeped in symbolism, so they're not easy to interpret, which is different than what Dany saw in the House of the Undying, which seemed pretty straightforward. It wasn't symbolic. There was Rhaegar, there was Elia, there was a baby, they had a conversation, he played his harp, she heard the music. That's not some mishmash dream of swirling visions and ideas. That's like watching a TV show. It's very, very particular. Jojen's dreams were all, the sea will flood Winterfell. That turned out to be the Ironborn coming over the walls, right? Very metaphorical, very symbolic. It's easy to get confused on that. Now, Patchface is another one that's like, he may know a lot, but does he understand it? Does it mean anything to him? What will his information ever be used by any other character? Well, we're going to do a Patchface episode, so we'll get into deeper waters with him when we get there. Pun intended. Jon Snow, of course. Jon Snow is in an unusual category because he's had a few prophetic-ish dreams that he doesn't quite understand, that maybe we readers have a little bit of better understanding of, but they're also vague and swirly, like they're not images of what's going to happen. They're symbolic and confusing and hazy. But he's seen the others. Well, Jon hasn't, but Sam has, and some of his other brothers have. So he's like, oh my God, that's real. So when Melisandre shows up and is like, this great cold darkness, they're like, yeah, we know. We've seen it. So pretty much the whole Night's Watch is on board with this. They know, but as we know, they are not having any success convincing the rest of the world. And they've barely even tried at this point. Jon also has dreams that are kind of unrelated to this or tangentially related to it, like his skin-changing dreams or his identity dreams, his crypt dreams, which are, like I said, somewhat related. His identity definitely has something to do with whether he's an Azor Ahai, if there's multiples, or the last hero, or an last hero, if there's multiples there too. Now, as far as people who are aware of it but aren't in it, right? All of the above. They all know they're in it to some extent. Quaithe, yeah, she might be someone who's had direct dreams of it, visions of it, but they're not associated with her, right? They don't refer to her. She's not the person in these dreams. She's seeing what's happening to other people, I think. Marwyn kind of similar, but through a more scholarly approach. And what about Sorella, right? Sorella, Elaris, they all heard what Sam said. Sam told the whole story to them, including the faceless man who used to be known as Jack and Agar. So that information could spread to a lot of people. All Red Priests have believed this for a long time. It's part of their religion that Lightbringer, waking dragons from stone, Azor Ahai reborn again. They've known that for a long time. They're just waiting for it. It's like, yeah, Azor Ahai will come again. And during the confines of this story, it is happening. Melisandre got the wrong person, but she's not wrong that it's happening. So I assume that pretty much every Red Priest on the planet is aware of this at this point. They don't all know about Dany and or Stannis, but they're all educated in this prophecy. It's not something that only the higher level priests get. I'm pretty sure this is just basic Red Priest R'hllorist belief stuff. Obviously, Stannis has been indoctrinated somewhat. He doesn't necessarily believe everything she does, but he's seen too much to dismiss it, right? He's seen Melisandre's powers. He's seen her predict things that have come true, and now he hasn't seen the others personally, but he believes that they exist. He believes these rangers that have seen them. So he's in on that too. He's very much involved. We have Aerys the First quite a while back. He told the court dragons would return. He discovered it in a book, convinced everyone it was the truth. And that had a big effect on the people, the Targaryens who came after him. Shara Seastar, maybe? Like, we don't know what she knew or didn't know, but she was deeply involved in sorcery and the occult, so it seems not unlikely. Duncan the Small, and of course Jenny of Oldstones, they were very close to the Ghost of Highheart, who told Jaehaerys II and presumably his wife Queen Shara that, well, they weren't king and queen at the time, but whatever, they'd eventually become king and queen, that the prince that was promised would be born of their line, and they believed it. So I presume Duncan and Jenny believed that too. Especially because they were willing to step aside and let the line pass through Aerys and Rhaella, which is where the prophecy said, according to the Woods Witch, would happen. Daenerys the Dreamer, we've talked about her separately, and we wonder if she saw any of this stuff. She saw the Doom. Maybe she saw this too, but we just don't know. It's not told. Daeron the Drunkard was one of the most powerful dragon dreamers that we know of in terms of the intensity of his dreams, or although maybe that's just it just looks that way because of how hard it was for him to handle them. Anyway, he is another candidate for having seen some of these things. Barristan Selmy. What? Why am I mentioning Barristan Selmy? Well, because Barristan Selmy just casually mentions the prince that was promised one day. He's like, yeah, he's the one that tells Dany that a Woods Witch told Jaehaerys and Shara that the prince that was promised would be born of their line. But Barristan doesn't indicate he knows who the heck that is. It isn't followed up on. Barristan says the phrase, the prince that was promised, but he doesn't indicate that he knows what that means. Or if he does have some idea what it means, he hasn't elaborated. Maybe Dany will ask him one day, but I don't know. I think Barristan will probably be dead before Dany even meets him again. Jon Snow at last as well. Not only has he had these dreams, not only is he deep in the thick of it because of who he is, but he's had a lot of conversations with Melisandre about these things. Plus, he's read some of the Jade Compendium. Let's not forget, that's an easy thing to miss. Before Aemon departed the Wall, he told Jon, hey, I left the Jade Compendium in your quarters with some pages marked. Go ahead and read that. He does. He doesn't say much about what he read, but he does say a little bit, and it has to do with The Last Hero. So we'll get back to that. And The Last Hero is, of course, really important here as well. Bran and Jon Snow are the only ones who really qualify for that, but we'll see as we move forward. Ice and Fire prophecy timeline. So we have various prophecies all pointing to different aspects of what seems to be the same event, right? The long night come again, yeah? The Song of Ice and Fire, the Long Night, Azor Ahai, the Prince, they all kind of indicate this one way or another. Sometimes it's vague, like some great cold darkness. Sometimes it's specific, like the others are coming. So we could just call it the Ice and Fire prophecy, or we could call it the Song of Ice and Fire. We're not quite sure if that's what George has in mind with that. It seems to fit. It could be a catch-all phrase for all these prophecies. The Song of Ice and Fire is the weaving of all these ideas together in song form and story form. And of course, the sources in world have a lot of detail on the Long Night. A lot of that hasn't been given to us. Sam has read a lot of these books, but he hasn't shared through his POV what he's read. Melisandre says the books that claim Azor Ahai will be born again, the ones that say when the red star bleeds, those books are over 5,000 years old. But the information in them has to be even older, assuming the timeline is correct, because they would have been first recorded during or after the first Long Night, which was more than 5,000 years ago, from what we know. So was there even prophecies for that, for the first Long Night before it? That is something that might be in the books. If there were prophecies for the first one, it would add credibility to prophecies for the second one, even though there's this massive time frame between them. And Melisandre's religion, the Red Priest religion, the R'hllorist religion, is rooted in this. Their religion, it's the basis that Azor Ahai will come again, that will be reborn again, that he will bear Lightbringer, that he will wake dragons from stone. This is intrinsic to their religion. It's the anchor. It's an anchoring piece for their whole belief system. It isn't just something that they added on to. Hey, here comes this, and then they fit it into their worldview. No, it's been in their worldview for thousands of years. They adopted it into their religion when they made their religion. This isn't something they added on later. So that's a really big deal. And there's probably other religions around the world that incorporate some of this stuff. For example, in Yi Ti, it's not unlikely that some of their belief systems have to do with the Bloodstone Emperor and the blood betrayal and all that. They're something that had an impact on how they viewed everything. And religion and books have an obvious overlap here because most people who write books, especially in this world, have some sort of religious view, some sort of religious filter that everything goes through, or a heavy one like a Melisandre or a Makoro. And obviously, religious texts are books as well, and they can have supernatural information that's completely accurate. So some of that's really, really old, right? On the other hand, Aegon the Conqueror's dream of some danger from the north, which apparently was specifically included the White Walkers. So he did actually see the White Walkers, which I don't think any other dragon dreamer has. Anyway, that's only about 300 years old, because that's, how long ago Aegon lived. So we've got a huge span. These prophecies have been popping up anywhere from 8,000 years ago to during the books, right? A huge span of time consistently. Now, the book that Aerys I found that made him believe the dragons would come back, actually, it might be multiple texts. He might have been convinced because he saw this corroborated several places. We're told it was just one source, but that's secondhand information. So we don't actually know that. He read it roughly 90 years ago. We don't know when the book was actually written, though. Like that source could be really ancient. Who knows? The Ghost of Highheart's visions that refer to Aerys and Rhaella's line producing the princess that was promised. Well, she said prince. That's about 60 years ago. Or at least that's when she told them to Duncan, Jenny, Jaehaerys, and Sheriff. She may have had the visions long before that, but she passed them on to her Targaryen compatriots at that time. She's another person. Melisandre doesn't know about Dany, neither does the Ghost of Highheart, seemingly. Which is a little bit confusing to me. Like, how did she get the gender wrong of the prince that was promised? Right? Maybe it's just that vague of a figure in their visions, and they just assumed it was a man. And Rhaegar found a scroll that said, "It seems I must be a warrior." What was that all about? It led him to the Song of Ice and Fire. It led him to the Prince that was Promised prophecy, but it's pretty clear he was wrong. Dany is a warrior in the sense that she rides a dragon into battle, that she's willing to face those dangers. She would not shirk from something like that. But she's not a sword and shield type warrior. Which is what Rhaegar is saying here. Rhaegar's like, I got to learn how to use a sword and a shield. I got to be a warrior. That's not quite right, is it, Rhaegar? And that's the thing about Rhaegar that we don't get from any other character, is we get, even though he's such a mysterious figure, we get a bit of a process from him. As a child, he thinks it's him. He does certain things, but he doesn't get stuck on that. When the evidence changes, he goes with it. He doesn't say, hey, no, I'm so egotistical that it has to be me. No, he's perfectly willing to say, okay, I was wrong. It must be my son. Comet, smoke and salt, all these other details that he thinks fit. And Maester, he's sending letters to Maester Aemon. They're talking about it while he's on the wall. So we see different ways of this prophecy being interpreted. We see Rhaegar taking this warrior bit literally. And if we look at Dany and her as an example of what the prophecy actually refers to, because the prophecy does seem to refer to Dany, so we can sort of look at that in reverse. If the prophecy refers to Dany, then Dany must be what that prophecy is referring to. Like, her qualities are what the prophecy refers to. So if it says she must be a warrior, well, it's a warrior in the sense that she is a leader, a commander, not a down in the scrum type fighter, not a Jorah Mormont, not a Barristan Selmy, more of a Nymeria type. Now, and then he moves on. We also missing some parts of Rhaegar's belief. We have this vision of him talking to Elia, but this is all prior to Lyanna. So did his views change at all after he met her and after they started hooking up and he decided to have another kid? He saw that he's assuming it would be Visenya or something. He never got to have confirmation of that. So there's a possibility that he had another fork in the road and changed his mind. Because we saw that he has the ability to change his mind with new information, we have to keep that possibility open in our minds. So that makes him very interesting. He's very scholarly in his approach. He's willing to admit mistakes and change what he believes. Even if he never did get it right, he may have eventually if he had enough time. A perspective of Ice and Fire. Here's our next section. This is a little bit off of the rest of the episode, but they relate very strongly. I think this phase of the episode will help enrich our overall understanding of how George uses prophecy as a theme, because Ice and Fire as a theme is expressed differently throughout, depending on character, circumstance, plotline, all sorts of things. So if we interpret, as I proposed earlier, the Song of Ice and Fire as a amalgam of all these different plot lines, concepts, themes, all the events coming together maybe later, we can expand on the concept a bit if we think of it that way. Sometimes they're portrayed as opposites. Sometimes they're portrayed as similar, even mixed. It's something that George plays with and explores in a number of ways. Here's one example. Drogo's funeral pyre. Quote,
"The third level of the platform was woven of branches no thicker than a finger and covered with dry leaves and twigs. They laid them north to south, from ice to fire, and piled them high with soft cushions and sleeping silks. The sun had begun to lower toward the west. The sun had begun to lower toward the west by the time they were done. Dany called the Dothraki around her. Fewer than 100 were left. How many had Aegon started with, she wondered.
Only a few hundred for him, too, actually. But his dragons were grown, and Balerion was maybe the biggest dragon ever. Certainly the biggest we've ever heard of. So there were some differences, but there are important similarities. And that's a big deal, comparing Dany to Aegon, because if Aegon started these dreams, united the Seven Kingdoms in order to prepare them for the others, well, Dany is sort of the climax of that. She's the one that the prophecy has been waiting for. The dream is referred to all this time. She's the one that is the reason why there needed to be someone like this, why this preparation was needed, to prepare for her. And of course, this pyre turned out to be a miracle, right? It caused the rebirth of the dragons. It wasn't something that Dany could replicate. It wasn't something that there's ingredients or a manual for, but it happened. It worked. And the rest is history, right? So again, Dany doesn't know what the Song of Ice and Fire is. She's thinking about it, but she doesn't have any real answers. She doesn't really even have a source for this at this point. But she also doesn't know her names or her parallel, her Aegon the Conqueror, who she constantly compares herself to. She doesn't know about him having dreams either. It hasn't even occurred to her. It might be an interesting thing for her to realize, yeah, a lot of my ancestors were dragons, had dreams, had visions. I'm not the only one having those. That isn't something she knows, that it was common in her family. It hasn't occurred to her that any of her ancestors, including her own parents, her brother, could have been having visions and dreams too. But she has seen these themes around. Ice and fire as a worldly device, as a conceptual topic, as a opposites, or as a opposites attract type situation, or two different elements working together. These are all things that can happen. There's a range of possibilities here that are all apparent just through observable reality. Here's another example. Jojen and Mira's oath to the king in the north through Bran includes this language. Quote,
"You are only a boy. Oh, you are only a boy, I know, but you are our prince as well, our lord's son and our king's true heir. We have sworn you our faith by earth and water, bronze and iron, ice and fire. The risk is yours, Bran, as is the gift. The choice should be yours too, I think."
It's very elemental, very naturalistic, very ancient, because that's the way the world was a long time ago. The earliest beliefs of the earliest humans were very rooted in nature and elements and observable things, observable nature, observable reality. Here, it's a complete cycle. Ice and fire, both ends of the spectrum. Bronze, iron, earth, water. These are all connected, circular, and sometimes competing. Here's another place that it comes up with the same characters. Quote,
"My lord father told me about mountains, but I never saw one till now. I love them more than I can say." Bran made a face at her.
"But you just said you hated them."
"Why can't it be both?" Mira reached up to pinch his nose.
"Because they're different,"
he insisted.
"Like night and day, or ice and fire."
"If ice can burn," said Jojen in his solemn voice, "then love and hate can mate. Mountain or marsh, it makes no matter. The land is one."
As usual, Jojen is very poignant. He nails it. It's perfect. Yes, they're opposites, but as Jojen says, opposites are not always in opposition. Opposites can work together. Love and hate can mate. Mountain or marsh. Yeah. Ice. There is no ice without fire. They also kind of depend on each other, right? Or if they didn't, the world would be really screwed. Right? If we had too much ice or too much fire, we need that balance. That's important. So yeah, they can work together just as much as they can cancel each other out. The opposites can attract. There's a lot of ways to perceive this that isn't just they're opposites, they're at war, they're an eternal. No, that's just not right. That is not how George sees it. He's got the whole amalgam of options here. So again, this doesn't directly relate to prophecies, but it does help us understand the vagaries. The language that prophecy uses is tricky. It's hidden. It's sneaky. It has multiple meanings. And we have to understand how George views ice and fire within the context of the story in order to at least sort of understand what he's getting at with these prophecies. And again, it comes back to songs and how great a device that is for pulling all this together, for pulling it all under one umbrella. Songs can make harmony from discord. Opposite elements within a song can function very well musically. Here's a passage I find similar to some of that in some ways. It's notably in the same book as, it's Clash of Kings. But it's a completely different viewpoint. As Jojen and Mira explain to Bran how opposites can work together, Melisandre doesn't see it that way. Melisandre is a ice and fire are opposites type of person without the other nuance. Her entire religion is that way, and that's an important aspect of analyzing the prophecies through the Red Priest and through her. Quote,
"The truth is all around you, plain to behold. The night is dark and full of terrors. The day bright and beautiful and full of hope. One is black, the other white. There is ice and there is fire. Hate and love, bitter and sweet. Male and female, pain and pleasure, winter and summer, evil and good." She took a step toward him. Death and life, everywhere opposites, everywhere the war.
"The war?"
Asked Davos. "The war," she affirmed. "There are 2, Onion Knight, not 7, not 1, not 100 or 1,000. 2. Do you think I crossed half the world to put yet another vain king on yet another empty throne? The war has been waged since time began, and before it is done, all men must choose where they will stand. On one side is R'hllor, the Lord of Light, the Heart of Fire, the God of Flame and Shadow. Against him stands the great Other, whose name may not be spoken, the Lord of Darkness, the Soul of Ice, the God of Night and Terror. Ours is not a choice between Baratheon and Lannister, between Greyjoy and Stark. It is death we choose, or life, darkness, or light."
So she clearly doesn't agree. She believes fire good, ice bad, which is just obviously wrong, right? I mean, we've just got through talking about how balance is important and how that's something we kind of all understand. This is a human worldview filtered through the concept of divine information. She believes these things, so they must be right. But we can demonstrably see that they're not only wrong, but how they've led her astray. We know she's wrong about a lot of things, even though she has the basic right idea that, yeah, there is a big evil darkness coming, big evil cold, and it does need to be defeated. So you kind of understand where she's coming from. The big evil darkness needs to be defeated, and it's cold. So it really does seem to fulfill her religion. But that's in part because her religion was based on what happened in the first long night. And it's happening again. So cold became a problem then. But we can obviously see how fire can be a problem if there's too much, or how Benero says that death will be defeated and everyone will live forever and there'll be a summer that doesn't end. That sounds good to R'hllor, but to the rest of us, it's like, that's not good. That's real bad. Again, where's the balance? Summer without winter? That's not good. Darkness without light? There is no such thing. That's right? If there's only light, then darkness doesn't even exist. Yeah, so it's clearly she's gone too far with it. Clearly the human element of this is what I believe is at the root of the problems here. Why she's gotten it wrong. Because, hey, fire's good. Well, let's go all the way. It's a very human thing to do, at least a common human thing to do. If something is good, we'll do more of it. But we all know that's the dose makes the poison, right? You know, like a little bit of aspirin is great. Too much aspirin will kill you. This is too much aspirin. This is too much fire. A little bit of fire is great. Keeps you warm. You know, you can cook your food. Too much fire and you melt or you burn or you die or it burns the crops. Or yeah, I mean, it's doesn't need a whole lot of explanation here why too much fire is bad, right? So she completely fails to see how Jojen's perspective there, how ice and fire can mate. If ice can burn, fire can burn, things like that. She doesn't see that. Her song is out of key. If we're going to stick with that metaphor, she's singing out of tune here. She thinks she's singing right. She's tone deaf, doesn't know it. She's like, I'm singing beautifully. Everybody else is like, yeah, no, you're not. And I think Davos gets this. He knows she's wrong, but doesn't have the words to express it. He's like, I hear this song, it's out of key, but not only do I not have the right words to contradict you, this conversation's happening while he's in prison, and she's speaking through the jail door. He's not exactly going to push too hard. He's worried about what she might do to him. So he's not exactly a neutral observer here. He can't exactly say what of course he's not neutral. He can't really argue with her without putting himself in danger. At least that's how he sees it. And then later, he gets a more full explanation. He talks to Salladhor Saan, of all people, who gives him the full story of Azor Ahai and Nissa, which, by the way, tells us that it's not an uncommon story. Like, Salladhor Saan isn't some scholar, right? He's a Lysine pirate. I mean, he's got money, and his family's been around for a while. They've had money for a while, which sometimes implies a greater access to education. But, like, studying ancient prophecies? Education? I don't know. So I tend to think that means it's a fairly well-known story, which makes sense. Because who spreads that story? The Red Priests, and there's tons of them. Azor Ahai and friends. The story of Azor Ahai has a lot going on. We're not going to cover every aspect of it, of course. Ultimately, it's the story of a hero defeating the darkness. That's the bottom line. Whether they forge a sword, whether that's actually a sword, what the deal with Nissa, setting all that aside, the end result is a hero defeating the darkness. And what I want to draw our attention to here is on what these different prophecies focus on. The Azor Ahai prophecy, as it comes from Melisandre, focuses on Azor Ahai, not on the danger. The danger is mentioned, but there's like no detail to it. It's just grand, cold darkness from the north. Melisandre knows where it's emanating from. She knows it's coming from the north of the wall for some reason. But if she has these other details, she hasn't really shared them. She never mentioned the others before. She's learned about them, but I think she didn't learn about them until she got to the wall and talked to rangers who had actually seen them. Still, it's not like she's surprised. It's easy for her to just fit this into her worldview, which, of course, she has to do as someone who very steeped in a dualistic religion. Everything has to fit that worldview. This is easy, though. She already calls it the Great Other, the enemy of R'hllor, right? The others fit that so well. Melisandre provides us with a good example of how the hero will rise without giving us much about the actual evil that this hero will be facing. Quote,
"He is the Lord's chosen, the warrior of fire. I have seen him leading the fight against the dark. I have seen it in the flames. The flames do not lie, else you would not be here. It is written in prophecy as well. When the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, Azor Ahai shall be born again, amidst smoke and salt, to wake dragons out of stone."
She saw it in the flames. I wonder what exactly she saw. Jon, in a quote we'll read later, pictures himself armored in black ice with a red sword burning in his hand. And the red sword burning in his hand is pretty interesting because Lightbringer from the tales is warm when it's just sitting there, but when it goes into battle, it bursts into flame and becomes super hot. So it's possible Melisandre saw this and thought she was seeing Stannis. The flames don't lie, she says, but she leaves out, at least this time, she says at other times, that her interpretations can be wrong. So the flames don't lie, but she can be wrong. And that's the part that matters. If you can be wrong, then it's this the same as if the flames were lying. The end result is the same. There's a mistake made here. So she's kind of like using mealy-mouthed words to indicate that everything is accurate, when actually there's a very clear way this can go wrong, and she admits it elsewhere. So she knows the terms, both Azor Ahai and the Prince That Was Promised. As I said earlier, she's the only one who seems to use both those terms interchangeably. She prefers Azor Ahai, but she refers to both. And again, no one else does that. The Prince That Was Promised and the Song of Ice and Fire, if we compare those again, or put them up against each other. Again, Mel says it's at least 5,000 years old, the books that she's read. But other people are getting it through dreams. And yeah, if you get it in a dream versus read it in a text, or you've been indoctrinated in that text as part of your religion, it's a very different intake. right? Something that you maybe never heard about. Now you're learning about it through a dream versus something. Melisandre, let's say she's 100 or 200, 300, 400 years old. That's a lot of time to believe what she's believed, right? They say, can't teach an old dog new tricks. Dogs don't live that long compared to Melisandre. Her lifespan is already 20 times that of like the oldest dog. So, yeah. And religion is even stubborner than a lot of these other things, especially when you've been steeped in it for just that long. It's unfathomable as human beings, the stubbornness of a 400-year-old. You know, like we all know older people who are stubborn. We know younger people who are stubborn, right? It's a thing that older people are more stubborn. I'm not sure that's actually true, but if it is, Melisandre is the stubbornest. And, you know, religious people tend to be pretty stubborn. Zealots, especially. Not all religious people, but zealots, yes. So, but that's just all validating for her because she can fit so much of this very easily in her worldview because her religion is based on so much of this. When she sees other signs, when other people have information or dreams or visions, it all fits for her. She's like, yep, well, you should be having dreams of this because it's happening. It makes sense that R'hllor would send visions to other people because it's happening. The times are happening. This is the time of trouble. This is when the Great Other is arriving. So of course R'hllor is going to send out the warnings and raise up his heroes and all that. But let's review really quickly what actually we know about what is said in the Azor Ahai prophecy. It's been said a couple of times. There's a few small differences in these different tellings. So we hear after a long summer, when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world. We've also heard it's similarly like when the red star bleeds, the darkness gathers. Pretty similar. Azor Ahai will be born again amidst smoke and salt. Okay, that's come up a bunch of times. The smoke and salt evidence is all over the place. There's a lot of different theories on who Azor Ahai is based on that smoke and salt. Shall wake dragons from stone? Well, that's a big part of it, but only one person's done that. Shall draw from the fire a burning sword, Lightbringer. That's tricky because if it's a sword, or actual sword, no one's done that except for Melisandre's, prearranged fire sword drawing that she just completely made all that up. Arguably, Dany drew Lightbringer is if they're dragons from the funeral pyre. So there's a lot of ways to look at that one too. Benero repeats the prophecy of Azor Ahai to a crowd as Tyrion is passing by. He also says Azor Ahai was born from smoke and salt. But he adds Azor Ahai will make the world anew. That's a lot bigger of a statement. And then it goes even farther. Benero says Azor Ahai will triumph over darkness and will bring a summer that will never end. Again, we mentioned this a few minutes ago. That's not good. And then Benero explicitly says that Azor Ahai is Daenerys. Then he says death itself will bend its knee. All those who die fighting in Azor Ahai's cause will be reborn. That sounds like what the others do. It's not good. Again, that's bad to have no balance between life and death. If everyone lived forever, that would be terrible. Die reborn fighting in Azor Ahai's cause. It sounds like, are you zombies? Are you some sort of Melisandre type? That's how she has an extended life. I don't know. It doesn't sound good though. Benero sees death as the domain of the Great Other, just like Melisandre does. So what they're saying is Azor Ahai will defeat the devil. The Great Other is their devil. So it's sort of like this champion from heaven that will defeat Satan, if you want to try to frame it into a Christian context. That's crazy. There's nothing in the Bible about, Jesus like defeating the devils, not just as a being, but all the evil in the world that exists because of the devil. Like, people won't die anymore? If that was in the Bible, it would be creepy. It'd be like, whoa. Yeah, I don't think God thinks that's good either. Now, Benero doesn't mention Lightbringer. That doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, but it's an interesting thing to take note of. Again, the whole idea of Lightbringer being mentioned as, I brought this up earlier, John reads that section of the Jade Compendium, which tells him Lightbringer glows and is warm to the touch, which is a clue that Stannis' Lightbringer is not, because it's not warm to the touch. It's also supposed to, like I said, become flaming hot when it enters battle. We haven't seen Stannis enter battle, so, well, Jon hasn't anyway. This is why Aemon is skeptical as well. But the whole thing could be a red herring, right? If Lightbringer isn't a literal sword, then none of that matters, right? If it's a dragon, well, yeah, dragons are warm to the touch as well, though they don't glow, but they do become fiery in battle, in a sense. So this was maybe a clever red herring on George's part, because he has Maester Aemon, who is so wise and knowledgeable, going down this track of the sword and how it's not warm. But if it's not a sword at all, that doesn't matter. Now, when Melisandre looks in her fires in her one chapter to see the enemy, she sees Bloodraven, she sees Bran, she sees other things, but she doesn't see the others. Though she does refer to the others as the great others' cold children, she still hasn't witnessed them. She sees a wooden face, corpse white, 1,000 red eyes. Yeah, the Bloodraven, that's Bran and Bloodraven. Beside him, a boy with a wolf's face. And she asks, was this the enemy? No, it's not. We know it's Bloodraven and Bran. They're also trying to stop this. They're allies here. They're both trying to stop what Melisandre wants to stop. Melisandre has maybe framed it improperly as to what the enemy is, what the Great Darkness is, but she's on the right track, and so are Bloodraven and Bran. She should see them as allies, and this is just proof how wrong she is. That she sees these potential allies, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type circumstance at worst. But she hasn't actually seen the Great Other. She hasn't actually seen Azor Ahai either. She doesn't ever see blue, which if she was seeing the others or something like that, she would see the blue eyes or something like that. Nothing in her chapters. The word blue doesn't even really appear, except for when she's perceiving Deep Lake. She envisions the fires of Hardhome going out because of the deep cold and the shambling dead. But again, no others. Just the cold so great that extinguishes the fires of the earth at Hardhome, which is pretty damn intense, but again, no others. And here's another piece of personal bias, which I think isn't even a Red Priest thing, although it might be. She thinks that dreams are an opening for the Great Other to whisper to people, to get in your head. By the same token, other people dream of the others, or of Azor Ahai, or of true visions, things that really will happen. How does Melisandre view that? What would Melisandre say to the ghost of Highheart? How could she accept this into her world? She's like, these are visions from the Great Other. Yeah, but these are just completely accurate, mundane visions. Yeah, Ghost of Highheart predicted through a vision that Riverrun would come under assault. Is that really the whisperings of the Great Other, or just accurate information? There's nothing evil about that, I don't think. So if she gets to a point where something just gets too hard for her to fit in her worldview, then maybe that'll cause her to think a little bit. But for now, everything just very easily fits in her worldview. She doesn't have to work very hard to say, these others are the children of the Great Other. That's fitting. He's a god of darkness and death. These are beings of darkness and death. It fits so well. And as we've said, though, we've been saying for years, it's going to be interesting when she learns about Dany, if she ever does. Maybe she'll die before that happens, but I assume she will. So Dany's the best candidate for Azor Ahai, but there's just no ice in her. She is all fire. She barely has any ice ancestry, just a little bit of Blackwood back there, several generations back. It's Jon who is the better, straightforward child of ice and fire, given his parentage, right? But again, this brings us back to the notion that there's multiple figures, just as the ancient myths tell us. There are champions from a bunch of different cultures that are equivalent to Azor Ahai. Hyrkoon the hero, Yin Tar, Eldrick Shadow Chaser. So maybe there's multiple champions just like that. Maybe Jon is one of them. Maybe Jon is the champion of ice and Dany is the champion of fire. Maybe, who knows? But it's an interesting detail. We'll handle the prince that was promised separately from Azor Ahai, even though there's a lot of overlap, and we'll include candidates here in a minute. And let's do that. Let's have a quick break, and then we'll get back to it. This is shaping up to be a nice lengthy episode. I hope you all are enjoying it. Let's see here. I want to make you all aware that we are considering a group trip, a journey to maybe Spain or England or Ireland or somewhere in Europe to visit Game of Thrones filming locations with a small group, maybe a dozen, maximum of maybe 20. Travel with us. Go to one of these locations, spend a week or so meeting each other and experiencing what's probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see some of these filming locations and to meet fellow super fans and hang out with us. If enough people are interested, we're going to do that. It's through Geek Nation Tours, so hit us up. Let us know if you're interested. A few people have said so already. We need to get, a few dozen people or so tentatively interested, or just a dozen or so actually confirmed, and then we'll make it happen. If not, then so be it. But we think that enough of you are interested, and we would think it would be really fun. We've traveled to these filming locations before. It is so much fun.
Yeah, we've seen ones in Spain and in Ireland so far, but there's obviously a lot more that we haven't seen yet, and more that are coming out because, of course, House of the Dragon still has new locations, and A Night of the Seven Kingdoms has a bunch of filming locations in Ireland now.
Very true. And the rough timeline for this was April, May 2026. So if that is a time frame that works for you or doesn't, then you can factor that in when you're deciding whether or not you want to try to participate. Kirsty Angel says, it makes sense to me that the prince who was promised would be somewhat Roynish or Dornish in origin because of the whole principality thing. That's a good call. It's not the king who was promised, not the queen who was promised, not the lord who was promised, the prince. That is very interesting. That's probably part of why Rhaegar thought it was him, because he was a prince, at the time when he discovered this prophecy. And then his son was a prince, of course, when he changed his mind about who it was. That's a good call. There's not a lot of principalities in fact, I think Dorne is the only principality, except for the Rhoynar culture, which, doesn't exist anymore. But it certainly existed for a very long time, and may even predate the first Azor Ahai myths if the Rhoynar existed before the Long Night, which I think they did, because we're told that the Long Night ended from the Rhoynish histories when the various gods of the river gathered together to sing a secret song. More on that later. But yeah, that's a good catch. I didn't think of it thinking about the rarity of the title prince, especially in Essos. In modern times, especially, because when we think of Essos, we think mostly of the free cities, and even the freehold of Valyria didn't have kings. So the Dothraki don't have kings. Yeah, there's just not a lot of kings and queens in Essos in general, which means there's also not a lot of princes and princesses. So good catch. The language is important, and here we go with the prince/princess that was promised. Speaking of that, the language is important, right? Maester Aemon tells Sam, "Oh my God, we got the gender wrong. It's the princess." Yeah, so here we go with how important language can be and how important it is to be precise. As we said earlier, Melisandre uses this term. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Whoop, wiggly, wiggly, wiggly. I skipped over something. Okay, well, coming back to the prince that was promised. First, we got to talk about the Great Other. Yes. An interesting aspect of the R'hllor version of the prophecy is that it includes the Great Other, which is confusing because there's a lot of reason to think this has nothing to do with the others, even though it sounds so similar. And again, that's part of why Melisandre can be so easily taken in by this. What she calls the Great Other is also called the Other, Lord of Darkness, Soul of Ice, God of Night and Terror. And yeah, that's pretty distinct, right? That does sound like the others. But there's a huge distinct difference that kind of kills the whole theory, which is that Melisandre perceives the Great Other as having black eyes. Very specifically, George points this out. Melisandre perceives the Great Other as having black eyes. That is just can't be, right? They have to have blue eyes. It's just every other has the blue eyes. It's just such a thing. The whites have the blue eyes. It's the most distinct trait they have, I think, by far. The show changed everything else about them except the blue eyes. Instead of making them fairy-like and graceful and scary in that sense. They're more just horrific and scary from a more regular perspective. Either way, the blue eyes are the most important detail, and the Great Other doesn't have that. So that's just a huge deal to me. And again, this is just how it has to be for a dualistic religion. Melisandre's making it fit into her worldview. Again, there's a storm god and the drowned god, right? Aegon does the same thing. Everything is the comet, that's the drowned god. Even though it's like, what sense does that make? The comet came from the drowned god? What? How did he get through the storm god controls the sky? How did, never mind. You don't have to argue with zealots. It's not going to work, right? But you see what I'm saying. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Anything of significant supernatural power, they have to credit it to one of their two gods. There's only two. If it's not, if it doesn't come from the gods, it's demonic. It's evil. It's unnatural. Makoro called the drowned god a demon. Victoria's like, hey, don't do that. Hey, watch your mouth. But Makoro didn't back down, of course. So again, I think it's very likely that the reason so much of this stuff lines up for Melisandre and other Red Priests is because their religion was based on the first time this all happened in the first place. Just because the others aren't mentioned in any Relorist associated texts that we know of, it doesn't mean that much to them. They don't care about this blue eyes detail, but to us readers, it's enormous. That's a big detail. So yeah, I think that's a pretty big deal. And I wonder if these texts, what else they say. I wonder if we ever will get more on that. And again, here's Melisandre's bit on dreams. Let's come back to that briefly because I think it's enormous and it takes us to some interesting places. She says, quote, sleep is a little death. Dreams the whisperings of the Great Other. So she doesn't trust dreams at all. But Aegon the Conqueror had the same dream of the others coming, which we're not supposed to trust that. Did the Great Other tell Aegon the Conqueror exactly what he was going to do? Hey man, I'm going to invade the Westeros in 300 years. Get ready for me. What? Yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it? So lots of accurate dreams that are helpful to humanity, or at least could be, and Melisandre thinks they're bad. So that's just a good, to me, that's proof that Melisandre is trying too hard to fit us all into her worldview rather than being open to possibilities that are outside of what her religion has taught her. John Merkel says, I know we always focus on his Blackfire clues, but one of the first things Illyrio says to Dany is, may the Lord of Light shower you with blessings. Maybe he's a true believer and knows the prophecies or the Song of Ice and Fire, something like that. Yeah, it's possible. You wonder what Illyrio believes. I'm skeptical of Varys's anti-magic stance because it was so self-serving. Like he really, really needed to convince Tyrion that he was on their side. So what better way than to just say that Stannis, everything about Stannis goes against everything I stand for. If he uses black magic, he's my number one foe. That's a really convincing argument. And it's exactly what Varys needed to do, is to convince that I'm on your side. I'm not going to turn you all in. I'm not going to flip and help Stannis win to save my skin because I hate Stannis. Does he? I mean, yeah, I think he doesn't want Stannis to rule. Stannis would not keep Varys as Master of Whisperers. He might kill him. And so that's more likely what Varys is worried about. The more mundane, Stannis will kill me rather than, I oppose use of black magic because of this ritual that was done to me, which may not have been done to him. Like, I am not nearly as sold that Varys' story about the voice and the cutting and all that was accurate. It could be. But, I mean, we'd be foolish to just believe anything Varys says without evidence, right? Without corroborating evidence. So, with that in mind, it's not so far-fetched that Illyrio could have a little bit of, supernatural in his background. But I somewhat doubt it, but it's not dismissible, and it's also not too late for him to maybe get mixed up with some of this. Let's talk about the last hero. Here's some old Nan for you. Quote.
This is a long quote, and I'm not going to do my old Nan voice. I'm just going to go ahead and say that because of the length. All right. Thousands and thousands of years ago, a winter fell that was cold and hard and endless beyond all memory of man. There came a night that lasted a generation, and kings shivered and died in their castles, even as the swineherds in their hovels. Women smothered their children rather than see them starve, and cried, and felt their tears freeze on their cheeks. In that darkness, the others came for the first time. They were cold things, dead things, that hated iron and fire and the touch of the sun, and every creature with hot blood in its veins. They swept over holdfasts and cities and kingdoms, felled heroes and armies by the score, riding pale dead horses and leading hosts of the slain. All the swords of men could not stay their advance, and even maidens and suckling babes found no pity in them. They hunted the maids through the frozen forests and fed their dead servants on the flesh of human children. Now, these were the days before the Andals came, and long before the women fled across the narrow sea from the cities of the Rhoyne, and the 100 kingdoms of those times were the kingdoms of the first men, who had taken those lands from the children of the forest. Yet here and there, in the fastness of the woods, the children still lived in their wooden cities and hollow hills, and the faces in the trees kept watch. So, as cold and death filled the earth, the last hero determined to seek out the children, in the hopes that their ancient magics could win back what the armies of men had lost. He set out into the Deadlands with a sword, a horse, a dog, and a dozen companions. For years he searched until he despaired of ever finding the children of the forest in their secret cities. One by one, his friends died, and his horse, and finally, even his dog, and his sword froze so hard the blade snapped when he tried to use it, and the others smelled the hot blood in him and came silent on his trail, stalking him with packs of pale white spiders big as hounds.
And then Luwin and Hodor interrupt the story. It's the first example of something George does every once in a while, interrupt lore with something. We're mid-sentence. It's particularly symbolic here because Luwin and Hodor interrupt the story. So Luwin is the representative of rationality. So it's fitting that he ends the supernatural tale. He downplays it all. He's explored it and found it empty. He's wrong, but yeah. Anyway, Hodor is literally a man who will be one of the last hero's companions. And of course, he opens the door here and he opens the door to the crypts to get out. And later he may hold the door to enable some kind of escape, something like that. This is obviously a tale not only of the others, but of the Long Night and the last hero. And of course, what makes the last hero story unique in this episode's context is it's not a prophecy. It's an ancient story. But as I indicated at the beginning, these two can be very similar things within the confines of a book. The last hero story very much appears to be foreshadowing. At the time, it looked like foreshadowing. Now, it's almost certainly that because we're seeing it play out in Bran's story. It's told to Bran specifically, but he's the only POV character to interact with the Children of the Forest at this point that we know. Well, POV character, yes. Maybe other characters have, maybe Benjen has, but not POV characters. And he is definitely, as the story indicates, learning their ancient magics for the purpose of fighting the others. His dog, his Summer, the horse, maybe he doesn't have a horse. It's not 12 companions, and I don't know if his sword is going to snap, but there's a lot in common with this story that no one else is even close to having in common. No other character in the story is... Jon has some elements of the last hero in his story, and some of the ones that Bran doesn't, but Jon hasn't met the Children of the Forest. I seriously doubt Jon's sword will snap. I mean, it's Valyrian steel, so that doesn't really line up either. However, Jon is the only other one to dream of white pale spiders. So let's come back to that when we talk more about Jon. The last hero his purpose is very similar to what we have honed in on about Azor Ahai and the associated Azor Ahai-like figures. They're not so much, they are warriors in a sense of the word, but the most important task they pull off to defeat the darkness is uniting people to fight the darkness together. Azor, as the Rhoynar example says, some figure, some being, someone united all the different gods of the river to sing a secret song that brought back the light. A uniter. That's what the last hero says in this example, in this quote. The last hero unites the Night's Watch and the children to defeat the others in the battle for the dawn. The children seem to already be doing that right this time around. They're training Bran, obviously, and it might be them who left that stash of dragonglass at the Fist. Someone left it, or someone gave it to someone to leave it. The source is almost certainly the children. Who else has 100 dragonglass blades sitting around, right? And we're told that in ancient times, the children would supply the first men with obsidian weapons. So like everything about obsidian weapons tells us that they come from the children. Like, we don't have people making them. They could be. I mean, in the real world, there are people that made obsidian weapons, but in Westeros, the only source of obsidian weapons that we've been given so far is the children. Sam read a different book about the last hero, which said he had a blade of dragon steel, which John and Sam are like, Valyrian steel? And they're like, I guess that's the same conclusion I think most of us reach, is that it's either a different name for Valyrian steel or something very similar to Valyrian steel, like a similar method, similar, forging method using similar magics or what have you. It's maybe not the same, but it sounds awfully similar. Again, Euron, it comes up here just briefly. Not only did I say earlier that he'd be the one that would want the darkness to come, he'd be like, all right, who's the prince that was promised? Who's Azor Ahai? I'm going to kill that. He would be like, who's this hero that's going to mess up my plans? I want to end that person. Whereas everybody else would want to like either not believe it or support the savior. Like, this person's going to save mankind. Or Euron's like, it's better for me if this savior is killed. So Euron's a little bit of an exception to all this and is an interesting possibility to consider separately. On the other side of things, we have the Citadel. Even they weigh in here a little bit. Quote.
Legend further holds that the Green Seers could also delve into the past and see far into the future. But, as all our learning has shown us, the higher mysteries that claim this power also claim that their visions of the things to come are unclear and often misleading. A useful thing to say when seeking to fool the unwary with fortune-telling.
I understand their cynicism. It's true. There are lots of fortune tellers in this world who are just scamming people in our world too, while we're at it, But they're not quite right here, are they? Yes, it's true. Foretelling can be very inaccurate and misleading. But he's talking in this quote about the Green Seers version of that. As we said earlier, Bran's visions, when he, for example, has that werewood vision, that very big one in A Dance with Dragons, he's not seeing symbols and haze. He's seeing very specific, particular images. He doesn't always know who he's seeing, but they're clear images of people with faces and eyes and beards or not beards and clothing and trees around them. It's not like vague images of ice and fire or shadowy beings. No, he's seeing very specific things. So yeah, this could be misleading, but it's not the same as the visions we've seen from like flame reading or whatever. Those are very unspecific. They're way more mysterious and harder to perceive what's actually being communicated there. It's way easier to get that wrong. So this is something that the Maesters just don't seem to understand, that there is a variety here. There are some vision type dreams or whatever that are actually pretty clear. And many that are not. Many that do fit this particular description, but it seems like the Citadel's treating them all that way, and that's not right. Magical overlap is something we've talked about a lot, right? But that doesn't mean everything is exactly the same. We have foretellings from a variety of magical origins, but they obviously don't all work the same. So what neither Bran sees nor is told about by Old Nan or Jojen is basically anything to do with dragons or fire. As much as he's seen, as much as he's been told, as much as he's been educated on, it doesn't really come up at all. In his coma dream, he did see dragons in the shadows of Ahai. But that's pretty vague, right? And that's it. And nothing since. So that's something that's waiting for a lot of these characters, is for that the other shoe to drop, for them to, they've been introduced to one part of this, one aspect of all this. Eventually the rest will come together. A lot of characters are going to learn the other half or the other 2/3 or whatever. And what that will do to so many different characters, I got no idea, but it sounds very compelling. All right, now we're back to the prince/princess that was promised. Melisandre, as I said, uses this term interchangeably. To her, they don't seem to be any different, which is a pretty big clue. Maester Aemon refers to some of the very same precise details. He says smoke and salt, the prince that was promised, a bleeding star. He doesn't actually say Azor Ahai. I don't know if we want to read too much into that, given how much these other details are the same and how ubiquitous a name Azor Ahai seems to be throughout Essos. Still, it reminds us that different prophecies, different magical origins can produce the same conclusions, or same prophecies that lead to the same conclusions, or different prophecies that lead to the same conclusions, I should say. Now, let's recall why this mistake was made via prince, princess, i.e. why the gender error popped up in these translations. Aemon is very explicit. He says it's Barth that figured it out. Septon Barth figured it out because the Valyrian word for dragon is genderless. It's gender neutral. And the translation here is, it's basically like the prince is the prince/princess is, it's a draconic meaning here. So that's the subtext, or if maybe it's not even subtext, maybe it's more explicit. So that Barth perceived that. He's like, wait, the word for dragon is genderless, so this prince that was promised, the translation should be gender neutral also. But no one else went with that. Barth is like the only one who caught that. Again, I'm curious how people who perceived this in a vision could get it wrong. It's one thing to read it in a text and just mistake gender neutral for male in a male-dominated world. That makes sense. You could see that playing out. It's realistic anyway. But yeah, like the Ghost of High Heart or other people who see that in a vision, like, I wonder how they got the gender off. Maybe just because they were predisposed to think it was a man and just went with that. I don't know. So in world, now this is not what we think, but what characters in the story think. We have our own list of candidates for the prince that was promised, or maybe we just have a list of one, Dany. But in world, there's a lot of candidates. What other characters think are possible. Obviously, the Ghost of High Heart predicted that it would be of the line of Aerys and Rhaella, and that was true. But the Ghost of High Heart doesn't seem to know that. The Ghost of High Heart's like, I guess I got that wrong. At some point, she might realize, actually, I was right. There's Dany, and that is the child of Aerys and Rhaella, isn't it? Oh boy, I was not wrong. Rhaegar obviously has the influence of Aemon and maybe Bloodraven, because Bloodraven and Aemon went to the Wall at the same time. Now, Bloodraven vanished beyond the Wall before Rhaegar was even born. So this isn't necessarily a big connection, but I think it's pretty strong indirectly. Bloodraven would have known things. He could have passed them on to Aemon that Aemon would have then corresponded with Rhaegar about. It's unlikely to me that Bloodraven and Aemon didn't at least have some conversations like this, but it's possible they didn't. Maybe they just didn't like each other, so they didn't chat much. Obviously, Summerhall happened, and that made Rhaegar think he was the prince that was promised because of the smoke and salt. There was smoke from the fires, salt from all the tears of all his family dying, or so many of his family dying. And Aemon agreed with that interpretation. So just as I pointed out earlier, when Aemon believes that Lightbringer is a sword, it's an effective red herring because Aemon is someone we trust. He's wise. Rhaegar would think the same thing. He would be like, oh, my maesterly ancestor, who is very well regarded, also believes I'm right about this prophecy. That's going to really give him a lot of confidence that he's right. Like, if Maester Aemon agrees with you, you feel good about your point. You feel good about it. You're like, yeah, Maester Aemon agrees with me. All right, I'm probably right. But Rhaegar did eventually change his mind, right? He started to believe that it was his son Aegon, partly because of there was a comet on the day he was born. That's a pretty big clue. And the first line is, when the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, Azor Ahai shall be restored, blah, blah, blah. The smoke and salt part for Rhaegar's son is Dragonstone. He was born on Dragonstone, which is a salty, smoky place, right? The smoke from Dragonstone, the volcanoes, active volcanoes, there's all sorts of smoke. And it's in the ocean, so there's salt everywhere. Stannis, Melisandre believed this too, because there's also a red comet. It wasn't on the day Stannis was born. Of course, it was around for a little while. But Stannis is at Dragonstone. He wasn't born there, but he's there. He's got some Targaryen blood, so that helps. And there's this whole Lightbringer business that Melisandre sort of foisted on the world, and even she kind of believes in it because she's holding the ceremony, making it true by going through the motions of what the texts say. Now, Jon Snow is where we get a little different. Nobody in Westeros or Essos that we know of thinks of Jon Snow as the prince that was promised. The fandom, however, does see this possibility. So this is the exception to all these others. No one in the fandom really thinks Stannis or Aegon or Rhaegar are this prince that was promised, right? But Jon Snow, a lot of people are holding out on that one, especially if you subscribe to the multiple Azor Ahai or multiple prince that was promised theory, which is has some momentum here. The smoke and salt for Jon Snow rest on his wounds, which seem to smoke when he's stabbed by Bowen Marsh, who is crying when he stabs Jon. We also have a bleeding star right there, because Sir Patrick of King's Mountain is killed by One, the giant, and his heraldry is a cloak with stars on it. And when One kills him, it's very brutal, and his cloak is blood-soaked, so the stars are bleeding. The problem with that theory is George stuck that in as an Easter egg about football. Sir Patrick of King's Mountain was a friend of his, and the giant, as in the New York football Giants, are the joke here. So maybe George was able to combine them into one thing that all fit together, but there is this other meaning here that might be all of it. But even bigger, much bigger in my opinion, and I think a lot of y'all would agree, is that when Melisandre is looking into the fire, she asks R'hllor for a vision of Azor Ahai. She sees Jon. And she sees Snow. Capital S. So that's a big deal, right? She's looking for that, and this is what she actually gets to see. It doesn't show her Daenerys. It shows her Jon Snow. And Snow. So that's a pretty big deal. Jon also is a son of Rhaegar, and thus fulfills the Ghost of Highheart's prophecy, which is that the prince that was promised would be born of the line of Aerys and Rhaella. He is of the line of Aerys and Rhaella, even though he's a bastard. Or even if he isn't, it doesn't matter. Those are still his grandparents. Jon has a dream of fighting the others with a burning red sword. That's a pretty well-equipped dead person, because he dreams of himself as armored in black ice, which is a reference to him being dead, I think. Being frozen, having gone cold, his body gone cold. Something that Bran also has a vision of. Jon, all warmth leaving his body. The burning red sword could be Lightbringer, right? We just got through saying how in battle, Lightbringer burns red hot. It goes from warm to hot. But Jon isn't wielding Lightbringer. He's got Longclaw, right? I don't think Longclaw is going to burst into flame. I guess it could, but that doesn't seem right. It's also just not warm when it's sitting there, so I don't know. That doesn't seem to really line up. Regardless, the evidence is pretty strong. Better than anybody else, except Dany. Now, Dany, the evidence for Dany is pretty overwhelming. No one else wakes dragon from stone, right? And when the Red Star bleeds, yeah, like the comet had just arrived. Dany is reborn amid smoke and salt, the pyre, Drogo's pyre, the tears that she was crying, and other people as well, like, I suppose, Miri Mazdur. But regardless, it all adds up there, and Aemon says it himself. He's like, the dragons prove it. She woke dragons from, like, no one else did that. Come on. Or what, are we going to have multiple people bringing dragons back from extinction? Probably not. Now, if we know, and Dany again is being pushed by Quaithe, influenced by Red Priests indirectly. Perhaps soon enough she'll be influenced by Red Priests very directly once Makoro arrives, assuming he does. Maester Aemon is no longer with us, so he can't influence her. He badly wanted to, so he tells Sam a lot of things that Sam may in turn pass on to Daenerys if he ever gets a chance. And of course, Sam blurts out what he knows. I know I said this earlier, but it bears repeating. Sam blurts out what he knows to Marwyn, Alaris, Lazy Leo Tyrell, and Pate, who is Jaqen Hagar in disguise, a faceless man. So who knows who else knows this stuff now? Because Sam kind of told a lot of people. Plus, everybody on the wall knows. Yeah, there's a lot of people who know these things now. It's just a matter of who believes it. Now, the prince that was promised of all the prophecies is the one we most associate with song because of Rhaegar. Not just because he's a musician, and not just because Dany hears music when she sees a vision of him, which I'm pretty sure is unique. I don't think she hears music or sees or perceives music in any other vision she has at any other time. Certainly, there's things that resemble music, like the chorus of her ancestors' voices, which is a little bit of a musical reference there, a chorus. But it isn't explicitly music from an instrument, a harp, very distinct. But also because Rhaegar is the only one to use the phrase, the Song of Ice and Fire, the Song of Ice and Fire. So it's inextricably tied, at least at this point, because he's the only one who says that, and Dany's the only one who thinks about it. Let's diverge a little bit again, as we did with a prior topic about themes of Ice and Fire, to talk about songs and memory from a little bit of a real-world perspective. Songs are more memorable than spoken words. There's more to remember, right? There isn't just the word and the meaning and the context. There's all those things in a song, plus harmony, melody, timbre, tone, rhythm, lots of different things. That's part of what makes them more memorable. And emotions are sparked by music in ways that spoken words are not. Spoken words can also evoke emotions, but songs have a lot more power to do that because they have the same power of spoken word plus the power of music, which is very strong for evoking emotion. And emotions are memorable. Emotions are what make things more memorable in the first place. Just plain data is harder to remember than when you have something emotional to associate with that. It makes it, again, that's just more to sink your brain into as far as memory goes. There's multiple parts of your brain at work when it's a song versus when it's spoken word. More of your perception is engaged, and thus that also makes it more memorable. A neutral subject, this is research stuff, not just my opinion. A neutral subject with positive music leads to positive memories. All of you probably know this from watching TV and watching movies. Like, music can make a kind of sad moment super sad, right? Like, you throw the right music in there and it's like, man, this is making me cry. Turn the scene off and the music alone might make you weep. You know, like, some music is just that strong. Maybe not for everybody, but for a lot of people. And researchers have done things like study brain activity, brain waves while listening to music. It's a big area of study. And some things I learned, just some brief overview of some things I learned by doing a little bit of research on this. Emotional intensity showed the highest correlation to what's called autobiographical salience and familiarity. We don't need to get into what exactly that means. It's just self-view, how you view yourself and things that are relevant to what you're hearing or engaging with. 3 musical components are particularly important in memory. Pulse strength, high harmonics, which is also called brightness, and fluctuation in the frequencies of our hearing range, low to mid rather than high. So this is separate from brightness. Emotional intensity also mediated the predictive effect. So music evoked emotions and memories are much more powerful, and especially based on those three data points. And when you add emotional intensity into the mix, it gets all the more powerful. So the results suggest, this is a quote from a study that I read, that music evoked emotions are strongly related to music evoked memories in healthy older adults, and that both music evoked emotions and memories are predicted by the same core musical features. Music seems like it's such a can often seem like magic in a sense, because it's so hard to like describe and categorize and solve and figure out. But we know a lot about it. There's repeatable results on a wide variety of humans with different backgrounds. And it does say older adults here, and it says healthy older adults. Yeah, because it's not the same for children, because, well, when you're 8, your memories are, 5-6 years long at most? So we're talking about long-term memory here, and there's no long-term when you're 8 years old, really. Or at least it's relatively short. That's why, or these concepts are why music therapy is a thing. Because music overwhelmingly elicits positive reactions and memories, or has the power to. So that's why it can be so useful. Bringing people out of depression or other related ailments. One method here, or at least a helpful method, is, remind people of good things in your life, or remind people of positive things. Have this positive soundtrack to your life. Even sad music can evoke positive emotions. According to this research and other research, sad music can evoke positive emotions way more than sad words or just sad sounds can evoke. Like, say, a good example of sad sounds is like someone crying. Sad words are like, I'm sad, or you're describing something depressing. But if it's set to music, that can actually make it positive. Think of how many like sad songs that you actually like. Some of them are like downright depressing if you look at the lyrics. Like, I like a lot of sad music. Some of it I just love. It gets me fired up. And then when you think about that, I'm like, sad music get me fired up. If this was just talking, it would not fire me up at all. It would be like, this is depressing. I don't want to hear this. Nina makes what I think is a strong, somewhat conclusion-ish point here. Songs and stories save the world. They are how we remember when there's no writing, when there's no other way to preserve memory or important human information. Songs and stories are our best way to do that. Songs perhaps even better than stories, because stories can fit within songs. I guess songs can fit within stories too. But still, the darkness of human knowledge, or the lack of human knowledge, when we lose everything we know, that's the ultimate darkness. Everything human civilization has learned, done, and loved, the ultimate darkness of cold wiping all that out, or the ultimate heat of fire burning that all out. If only humanity remains, memory through song and story is the only way to preserve what we know. And of course, in this world, there's also like the Werewood Network and things like that. But still, you get the point, right? Songs and stories are the real light bringer. Or the friends we made along the way, if you prefer. Nina also suggests that A Song of Ice and Fire is a story about stories. Every character's story is its own story, and all these stories are woven together. Even these minor characters have their own stories. That's something George does such a good job about. How many episodes have we done on single characters that aren't POV, that have just so much to talk about, so much backstory, so much context to place them in, to imagine what they might have done or how they might have reacted, or all these other things. That tracks for me. Nina saying that it's a story about stories. Well, with concepts like that, it really lands. I do wonder if Danny will, as we asked at the beginning with our poll, is Danny going to hear that music again? That Rhaegar's harp, or something that she thinks of as the Song of Ice and Fire? Will there be a literal moment where she hears music and thinks Song of Ice and Fire, or something like that? Probably not, but you might because of the music from that vision. It certainly sets it up. Now, here's a challenge, though. I mean, this is a book after all, so music. It's a little harder to use music in books as a something that lands. Obviously, TV shows and movies were the examples I use, and that's where it works really well because you can actually obviously hear the music. In a book, it's like you have to imagine it or something, which doesn't land as well. So I'm not sure that's the direction George will go with it. So that kind of argues against actual songs being important. The metaphor of song might be more what he's aiming for here, but we'll see. Let's talk about Aegon's dream. Yes, as I've said before, and as most of you are aware of by now, this came from George. It isn't just House of the Dragon thing. It came from George. House of the Dragon did run with it. And this is where we're going to parse what's TV only and what George has said. But let's start with the original wording of what George said. Quote,
Aegon finally decided to take over Westeros and unify the 7 kingdoms that existed at the time under a single rule. There was a lot of speculation that, in some sense, he saw what was coming 300 years later, and wanted to unify the 7 kingdoms to be better prepared for the threat that he eventually saw coming from the north, the threat we're dealing with in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Seeing the threat of the others is not the same as seeing a prophecy of Azor Ahai, but they're obviously connected to the same events, or the prince that was promised, etc. So this is a difference. Aegon saw the danger without seeing the savior. Most of the other things we've seen are the savior is what they're focused on. Azor Ahai will come again. The prince that was promised will come again to defeat this darkness of some kind. Here, Aegon's dream focuses on what that actual threat is. So it's a difference. It's a very different angle to the whole thing. He's seeing a different piece of the pie, different piece of the puzzle. And I wonder how that is for some other dragon dreamers. Like maybe it's mostly we hear about them just dreaming of the dragons returning. It doesn't seem to be what Aegon dreamed because, I mean, in his time, the dragons hadn't even died out. It may not have even occurred to him. There wasn't necessarily a prophecy that the dragons will die out and then come back. We don't hear anything about that. So that sort of when will the dragons return thing started after the dragons died out. So what we have here is yet another angle that someone's supernatural background or insight gives us a different piece of the puzzle. So he didn't see any sort of savior that we know of. Aegon didn't imagine a savior. And this is important because in the show version, Aegon believed a Targaryen had to sit the Iron Throne. But that isn't what George says. That's a show-only invention, so we got to ignore that for purposes of understanding the books. Here is Ryan Condal, though, in his words, telling us what George said, which is a little different. So let's check it out. Quote.
That actually came from George, at least the origin of that point. He told us very early on in the room, as he does. He just casually mentioned the fact that Aegon the Conqueror was a dreamer who saw a vision of the White Walkers coming across the wall and sweeping over the land with cold and darkness. But it never made the history books because he never told anyone. Or at least the people that he told didn't tell the history writers. So it's in George's head, and at some point it will come out.
Yeah, I mean, that's Ryan telling us what George said, and I don't have any reason to doubt him. Maybe he didn't get the exact wording right. I doubt he just hit record and got George's exact. This is his memory of what George said. But that bottom line that this is in George's head, at some point it will come out. Yeah, I think Dany will maybe discover that, or someone will, or multiple someones will discover that actually some of this Targaryen dynasty is a little bit more steeped in dreams and visions and prophecies than some people may have realized, especially Dany herself. So again, George doesn't give this aspect of Aegon's dream as there must be a Targaryen. It's not like there must be a Stark in Winterfell. There must be a Targaryen on the Iron Throne. That isn't there. So maybe he had a different version of that. Maybe he did interpret the prince or princess that was promised, meaning some Targaryen. Maybe not necessarily the king, because it says prince. So did Aegon's dream actually contain that phrase, the prince that was promised? Or did he have the dream? It led him to research, starting to look at old books. He tells Visenya and Rhaenys they also have some insight. Maybe they know which books to look at together. They all look at different books, and this is what they find. And maybe that's how they discover the prince that was promised. They backfill that. He has the dream. They look for similar dreams written down by other people. Maybe Daenerys the Dreamers, where they start, and then they start to look at other less well-known dreamers within the family, and realize, hey, Azor Ahai, prince that was promised, that's aligning with your dream. You know, it fits with the White Walkers in this cold darkness from the north, the unifying principle or detail being this cold darkness from the north, this danger. Even if these other prophecies don't mention the others, it still pretty clearly fits the same idea. Maybe they had the right books. Maybe Dragonstone back in Aegon Visenya Rhaenys' day had a lot more books from Valyria that could explain some of these things that no longer exist thanks to Baelor, right? Aerys the First and Rhaegar came after Baelor. So some books definitely survived that mention these prophecies, or maybe they got new books. Maybe Aerys the First restocked the libraries, 40 years after Baelor burned everything. Because obviously there were books that pointed to these things after Baelor died, so he didn't get it all, right? So Aegon very possibly was like, bring me all the books. I got to research what I'm seeing here, maybe in my dream. And that leads him to conquer Westeros. And maybe it wasn't just the dream. Maybe it was the dream followed up by the research, and this whole picture made him reach this conclusion that, you know what? I'm going to have to unite the land here, I don't know that he would have told anybody else, which is why it's not in the history books. Maybe he told Oris Baratheon, maybe some other of the Valyrians that were in his court. But we don't know. We don't know. It definitely helps us understand why Aegon is such an unknown, why his personality is missing from the history books as well. This is part of why. He didn't want them to know about this. And there's no way to keep all that information from the history books without also keeping a lot of other things. You just got to keep a low profile and not give much away. So maybe he had more than one vision too. George said, or Condal says Aegon was a dreamer. So that means more dreams than just this one, right? I don't know if you would call him a dreamer if he just had one. And I don't know that we have a lot of examples of dreamers that just have one dream. So the same dream may have been recurring. He may have seen it. It may have been recurring, but with differences each time, subtle. It was not the exact same every time. Maybe he had a variety of different visions related to this. Maybe he just had other visions altogether that have nothing to do with this. So who knows? It sounds like it's possible, though. If he was a dreamer, then a lot of things are on the table for possibilities here. But something made him take it seriously. Possibly just the notion that it's a common enough thing in his family. Daenerys the Dreamer is the reason they're all there, so they have a lot of trust in prophecy. Like, okay, well, none of us would even exist without prophecy. So let's not just toss prophecy to the side here. Let's take it seriously. But again, none of the prophecies, none of his dream, none of this seems to be something the uniting of Westeros doesn't seem to be in the dream. It's a conclusion that he reached because of the dream, I think. That seems to be how it's written, which is a unique feature of his dream compared to the other prophecies. Nothing in any of the prophecies say you must unite Westeros. However, there is an overwhelming recurring theme of unity, of having to bring people together to fight the darkness. So that, in an indirect sense, is a bullseye. Even though it doesn't seem to directly apply to Aegon in that sense, you could see how it would fit, because that's a big piece of uniting. Aegon the Conqueror uniting Westeros into something like a unified army is perhaps the biggest piece of unification that any of these characters have done. Some of this is still ongoing, so it's hard to say. Arguably, Dany is doing something similar by bringing together Unsullied, Dothraki, lots of other people from Essos, and eventually lots of people from Westeros. So that could be perhaps the most diverse host/army of anyone's ever seen. But so is Jon Snow. Jon Snow is uniting Stannis and the Free Folk and different Free Folk cultures and the Night's Watch all together with some Northern Lords in the mix. So yeah, again, that's why we struggle to say there's only one Azor Ahai, because so many other people seem to fit. Like, you could argue Aegon the Conqueror has an Azor Ahai element to him, given this unification business. And of course, Dany, who I would rate as the biggest uniter of them all, or at least on track to be, is the stallion who mounts the world, which is, we haven't had much cause to bring that prophecy up, but the stallion who mounts the world brings all the Khalasars of the world together into one. Even the Dothraki have this vision of a great uniter. They don't see it as a uniter. They see it as a great conqueror, a great warrior. But the subtext is brings everyone together to fight for one cause. And who else could it be? Like, it's hard to come up with anyone else for the Azor Ahai other than Dany, given the dragons thing. But it's also really hard to... Who else could the stallion who mounts the world be? In world, they believed briefly that it was Rhaegar, and maybe Dany still thinks that, but I think pretty much the rest of us are all convinced it's her. Like, she checks off all those boxes, and it looks like she is going to unite the Dothraki. That's been prophesied, too, in her own dreams, with the whole crones bowing to her vision. So yeah, who else could it be? The Dragon Dreamer soundtrack. That's our next section here. So there's been a lot of Dragon Dreamers. Obviously, we've talked about Dany and Aegon, and maybe they're in their own category. So we've talked about them anyway. So what about these other people? What are they seeing, and how do they fit into all this? Mostly, they're just seeing a small part of this, right? Take the Azor Ahai screed. When the darkness gathers, red star bleeds. Azor Ahai will, wake dragons from stone, bring light, bringer from the fire. All they're seeing, the Dragon Dreamers seem to be seeing, is the waking dragons from stone part. They're only seeing the dragons returning part. They don't see the others. They don't see the red comet. They don't see any of that other stuff, right? Rhaegar read about the red comet. Aemon read about the red comet. It's in these ancient prophecies. It wasn't something they perceived through dreams, as far as we know. So all these Dragon Dreamers seem to have, in terms of their piece of the puzzle, is someday the dragons will return. But as Aegon is an example of, and maybe Dany, and Dany's the dreamer, the dreams of Dragon Dreamers were a lot different back when dragons did exist. They weren't dreaming about the dragons returning, as far as we know, because the dragons weren't gone. Maybe some of them had dreams of the dragons being gone and then coming back, but we don't hear about that. So everything we've heard about dragons returning comes after the dragons die out. So that's very curious. And of course the Dragon Dreamers their dream is different than Aegon's, as far as we know. There's none of the Dragon Dreamers that we know of have perceived the others, or even the Long Night or anything like it. It's just this dragons returning thing. That's it, that is a lot, because it's supernatural dreams, basically. But that's it. They don't see, their slice of the pie is kind of small compared to some of these others. But there's also a lot of unknown Targaryens here who are having these dreams. It's possible some of them had much more vivid imagery here, and they just didn't know what to make of it. Maybe some of them didn't write it down, but maybe some of them did. And that could be interesting. That could be a way for George to give a little more information to some of these main characters, is to reveal some books. But these are Targaryens, too. We have to keep in mind that they're all very privileged people that are not unlikely to have big egos. So a lot of the Targaryens would be like, it's me, I'm the one. A lot of them would feel like confidence, an unearned confidence that they're the special one. And even if you aren't, that arrogant to think that you're probably the one, you want to at least check and make sure. If you're aware that someone in your family is going to be this special being, you might want to make sure, check at least to make sure it's not you. And if it is, then, well, get on with it. So, and if Dragon Dreamers did have this idea from the TV show that there had to be a Targaryen on the throne, well, until post-Aerys, they would be like, all right, we're fine. We do have a Targaryen on the throne. So they wouldn't have anything to do. They'd be like, yeah, well, we're good. There's still a Targaryen on the throne. No worries. It isn't until 280 years later, 284 years later or so, that ends. So there hasn't been that long of a time for people to dream of, we need a Targaryen on the throne. Still, that hasn't been a thing. We have not seen anything in any prophecy or dream that says Dany has to be the queen or has to rule Westeros or sit the Iron Throne to make any of this happen. It isn't necessarily a prerequisite. I still kind of think she will, but it doesn't seem to be prophesied. Again, prince/princess that was promised, not queen. So I think what a lot of the other dragon dreamers were dreaming of when they dreamt of the return of the dragons. This is something Joe Magician, I think, originally introduced me to the idea of. So shout out Joe Magician. Or shout out someone else if I'm wrong about who I got this from. But I think it was Joe Magician. The idea that a lot of the dragon dreamers were dreaming of Dany. They were perceiving the return of the dragons, and they were seeing this figure in those dreams that did it. And because it's a generic Targaryen, they can perceive it as themselves. They don't know who it is. They see silver hair, or maybe they see no hair, because that's how she came out of the fire, which might be why Egg thought it was himself, because he didn't have hair for a while there too. That could be very unfortunate, misleading detail there. So Summerhall could have been a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So many of the people who tried to bring dragons back used wildfire. Aerys, Egg himself. This maybe argues that they were perceiving wildfire in their dreams too, which means they aren't dreaming of Dany. If they were dreaming of wildfire bringing back dragons, they were dreaming of failed attempts and maybe not realizing those were failed attempts. They're dreaming of what their descendants would try, but they maybe didn't dream the whole thing. They just saw wildfire. And so that's why they lean towards wildfire, not knowing that they were probably dreaming of Summerhall or of Aerys and thinking and seeing what they expected to work. And actually it's an example of it didn't work. But dreams are misleading, right? You can see this happening and think, is this something that I'm supposed to do? Or is this a warning of what not to do? There, with the difficulty of dreams, that's a pretty easy thing to get lost in. Rhaegar certainly looked too hard for what wasn't there, right? But he wasn't far off. And as we said earlier, he did a pretty good job of changing his mind, something like that, and adapting to the new evidence. But he kept getting wrong evidence, so he kept adapting to bad input. John Merkel says, the Targaryens may have imagined themselves the Bran of the prophecy, the quote hero, the last hero, or the Azor Ahai, when they're actually the Jojen, destined to tell the tale and die, destined to have the information, pass it on to someone who matters. That's a good call. Like so many of these other Targaryen princes and princelings and kings and queens that may have thought it was them, they were just all building it up to Dany, who was the actual one. Dany's the Bran of this prophecy. But they didn't know that. They are the Jojens. That's a good way to put it. I like that. It's pretty cool. This next section is called sheet music. And the point of that is to extend our musical metaphor, our song metaphor, into the written word and how that applies here. So we've talked about Melisandre's texts and other books from ancient Ashai, which are probably the oldest written sources for anything resembling the Azor Ahai prophecy. The Targaryens clearly have some sources of their own. Obviously, Septon Barth is a great source on dragons. Most of his writings were unfortunately burned. Plenty of other texts were burned as well. Thanks, Baelor. But as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, and now we get to focus on him, one king in particular did what he could to get the books back in the Red Keep. Quote,
assuming the throne in 184 AC, Daeron's second son, Aerys, had never imagined he would be king, and was singularly ill-suited to sit the Iron Throne. Aerys was learned in his way, though his interests were largely to do with dusty tomes concerned with ancient prophecy and the higher mysteries.
So Aerys read that the dragons would return, or at least that's the part that Egg tells Dunk. And it's a young Egg who says this, so he's not the most reliable source of information here, because he's also excited about it. He's a child. He's hearing what he wants to hear. He tells Dunk, wouldn't that be amazing if dragons came back? And Dunk's like, I don't know, that would be so great, actually. That quote's a little bit misleading because it makes it sound like Aerys became king in 184. Daeron became king in 184. Aerys became king in, I think, 209, right after the Great Spring Sickness. So he is the most bookish of all the Targaryen kings, and the one that restored the belief, at least from a prophetic standpoint, that the dragons would return. there were attempts to rehatch dragons, to hatch the dragon eggs prior to Aerys, but they didn't do that on a basis of, we know because of a prophecy that this is going to work. They did it because they just really wanted dragons back. The dragons are the source of their power, and they're like, we want these again. Let's try to hatch them. So they tried all sorts of things, but those things they tried weren't rooted in trying to fulfill prophecies. They were maybe warlocks can do this. Maybe this other thing will work. Maybe wildfire will work. They weren't trying things that came from existing prophecies, though they may have been trying things that came from dreams, from newish dreams, from recent dreams. So in this case, what Aerys is dealing with is not a prophecy from a dream or a vision directly, although that may be how it started. It's one that was written down, a prophecy put to text, which obviously there's all sorts of ways it can be wrong or misrecorded, let alone just the basic flaws that come with any prophecy, the inherent issues that come with anything from this angle. So, but Aerys did establish it as a persistent belief. After him, pretty much every Targaryen was on this track, at least somewhat. Maybe Maekar didn't, but maybe he did. Aerys didn't actually try to hatch his eggs, right? They went from trying to hatch the eggs to just thinking about this prophecy and wondering how that would work. So it's definitely an interesting shift in Targaryen behavior after Aerys came along. But Egg, of course, did. Egg did culminate all this with Summerhall. Maybe both a culmination of the prior generation and Aerys's influence. Tragic combination there. And let's look at the Rhoynar histories again real quick. I've talked about this once or twice throughout this episode, but let's hone in on it a little more here. You could say that the Rhoynar histories share a thread, or maybe you could say that they harmonize, to keep with our song metaphors. Quote,
"The Rhoynar tell of a darkness that made the Rhoyne of Essos dwindle and disappear, her waters frozen as far south as the joining of the Selhoru, until a hero convinced the many children of Mother Rhoyne, such as the Crab King and the Old Man of the River, to put aside their bickering and join in a secret song that brought back the day."
Unity and song are the key elements to their victory, according to this anecdote. But it also says a single hero is who united them and kicked it all off. It was the combined efforts that worked, but none of that would have happened without this unifying hero figure. Again, a recurring aspect to these prophecies is a unifying figure that's crucial to any of this working. So yeah, after Aerys I, lots more focus on prophecies. It was a big deal. Jaehaerys II and Shera believed the ghost of Highheart, that the prince that was promised would be born of their line. They accepted that pretty much uncritically, as far as we can tell. And I bet that's partly because they were primed for it, because of Aerys I and this talk of prophecy and that the dragons would return, something that all the Targaryens want. So it's definitely one of those things that they would justify or hope for, or maybe, have reverse denial about, like, yeah, it's coming, it's happening. We just gotta make it happen. We gotta do what we must to make it happen. So Jaehaerys and Shera were all about it. They're like, yep, Ghost of Highheart said so. We believe her. She's had accurate visions. We got no reason to doubt it. But just like Aegon, what books got involved here? Because I don't think, just like I don't believe Aegon the Conqueror stopped with visions, he probably, opened up some books and tried to learn more about what he was seeing. I bet these two did too. Not automatically, it's just a not unlikely thing to imagine. They would want to know who the prince that was promised was. Like, that's just something they've heard of already, maybe? I mean, maybe they had, because of Aerys's groundwork. Maybe that was just common knowledge at court because it had been made a big deal in a prior. Yeah, so they wouldn't just say, prince that was promised? That sounds cool. I don't need to know anything more than that, though. No, you feel like, wait, what is that? At some point, they would have asked and maybe learned and maybe been told, and who knows? But we don't have anything to go on as far as specifics, of course. Like the Dreamers, we can assume some Targaryens learned some things that history does not record. Supernatural dreams, things they learned in text that they didn't make mainstream because it might make them seem crazy or because they wanted to keep it a secret for other reasons. And in terms of history not recording things, George is very consistent with that. The word prophecy only appears once in the World of Ice and Fire, and it's in reference to Aerys the First. Only 3 cases of the word vision being used in a supernatural context in the World of Ice and Fire. Also, one being the High Septon claiming he had a vision to not fight Aegon the Conqueror. So I think that was not a real vision, just a common sense that he framed as a message from the gods. But also Baelor the Blessed dreamed of the Great Sept, which that I kind of take as accurate, as because I bet Baelor was sincere, but I mean he also wanted this. He probably just wanted to build a big church. Stannis Baratheon sends a super chat, says, does Aegon's strategy post-conquest make sense to you if he envisioned a northern threat? No relationship was really established with the North and actually weakening the wall in many ways. Yeah.
Can I say first off how funny it is? The name that's asking this question.
Stannis.
Picturing like actual Stannis, like ask. Anyways.
That is really funny. Stannis is like, yeah, these guys didn't do it right. Yeah, Stannis would point out the flaws here. That's Stannis for you. I like that. I appreciate that. There are some possible flaws here, or it can be a little hard to frame. I agree with that. But I can also see it as Aegon was too focused on establishing the realm. Like he did the conquest. It wasn't over then. He still had to keep the realm together and make that all work. Make sure that would last. I think he was more focused on that. So that's kind of where I land on it. Yeah, he did the thing that he needed to do, which was unite Westeros. But if he didn't keep working on that, it would lose it all. And then what good would it have been? So that's kind of how I look at it, that he was really focused on just making sure it would last. Rather, he wasn't too worried about the short term. Yes, the Night's Watch was starting to decline under his watch. Absolutely. Aegon's conquest absolutely screwed the Night's Watch's numbers up. Like they just lost the ability to get new members when wars ended. Like you have the Reach fights the West. The losing side, a bunch of people get sent to the wall. Well, with unification, that never happens anymore. The kingdoms aren't fighting each other. There's no mass sending of people to the wall at once. It rarely happens. I mean, it did happen occasionally, even under Aegon and later Targaryens, but it was a lot rarer. So yeah, but that's a short-term problem. If Aegon's belief is that this is a long way in the future, he's not going to be worried about the short term of the Night's Watch. So I think you can explain it away, but you need to bring up several points, several reasons, and I think it works. It's not as clean as a lot of these other things, but it works. Yeah, he weakened the wall, yes, but it was a short-term thing. It depends on what he saw in his visions, too. Maybe his visions told him that this would work itself out. There's a lot missing here that could explain it. Some of it is just left up to George's imagination. And if, as Ryan Condal indicated, George is going to tell us more about this someday, well, yeah, then we'll get answers. So I think that this is something that's forthcoming. The three-headed dragon. This, to me, is one of the most interesting aspects of this episode because there's some underexplored connections between Aegon and Daenerys. Obviously, on the surface, Aegon, three heads of the dragon, him, Visenya, Rhaenys, there was only 3 dragons alive at the time. That part's straightforward from matching a 3-headed dragon. Same for Daenerys. She's reborn, or she's born, and the dragons are reborn, and there's 3 of them. So, of course, and she intends to take the throne of Westeros. So there's obvious reasons for her to compare herself to Aegon in a mundane way, but also in a supernatural, prophetic way. And let's recall what Rhaegar said. Remember, way back earlier in this episode, I said we'd come back to this. It was too much to cover at once. We're trying to take small bites here rather than huge bites. Rhaegar said there must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads. He didn't say the dragon must have 3 heads, by the way. That's an important distinction. He said the dragon has 3 heads. So Rhaegar clearly seemed to interpret this as he needed 3 children because he was referring to 2 kids and needing one more. He must not have seen the stone dragon's part as literal. If he was aware of this prophecy, which he must have been, he doesn't care about the stone dragons waking up, or he must have looked at that as some sort of metaphor and been like, no, that's nothing, or that's something later. Because he doesn't seem to be referring to that or caring about that. He's focused on the 3 princelings, the 3 heads of the dragon from a Targaryen perspective, not 3 literal dragons. With Dany, well, these 3 literal dragons come on pretty early on, so she's obviously going to focus on that. Now, we also find out that Aerys tried to hatch dragons, but Rhaegar didn't. And Rhaegar's the one that seems to have more information, and Aerys was obviously insane too, so we can easily discount that. During the House of the Undying is when Dany gets this vision of Rhaegar, but she also gets this. At one point, it's 3 fires must you light, 3 loves, blah, blah, blah. 3 heads has the dragon is one of the lines in there. So it's kind of repeated it is in a separate part of her jaunt through the House of the Undying. It's all very predictive and riddle-ish. Obviously, they're not informing her that she has 3 dragons. She knows that. So what do they mean when they say 3 heads has the dragon? They aren't talking about the obvious, I don't think. And if it's talking about dragon riders, which is maybe what the angle Rhaegar was seeming to take, well, that's another problem. Because as Dany herself notes, there aren't even 3 living Targaryens, probably, as she sees it. Maybe there are. But if you count Jon as one of them, and the other one, well, ironically, even though I think most of us believe that Aegon Young Griff is a Blackfire, that would give him some Targaryen blood anyway, but even he would be a better candidate for a head of the dragon if he was actually Rhaegar's son. He would be, Dany's niece, or nephew rather. So that's a much closer relationship. So it's always stuck out as one little point that makes me not 100% sold that Aegon is a Blackfire, even though that's still clearly where I land, given what I know. And if Dany is introduced to this 3 heads must have the dragon thing, she hears this from a prophecy. She's already hatched 3 dragons. So she's like, okay, that could lead her to realizing that she's fulfilling this prophecy herself. But here's where I think it gets really interesting. When you combine this notion with Aegon's dream, House Targaryen didn't have a sigil before Aegon. They didn't bother with that piece of Andal heraldry during the Lords of Dragonstone era. Aenar didn't have one. Gaemon the Glorious didn't bother with that. It was when the conquest began, Aegon and his sisters unfurled their new 3-headed sigil for the first time. Yes, it looks like a reference to themselves. The 3 siblings are the 3 heads with 3 dragons. But if he also had a dream that Rhaegar later followed up on, did he dream of the 3-headed dragon too? The dragon must have 3 heads. And that's why the sigil fits so well for them. He's like, we are the exposition. We are the explanation here. We are the result of this prophecy. We are fulfilling the prophecy. There's 3 heads, 3 of us, 3 dragons. It must be us. Dany's starting on that same track of realizing it's going to be her, or that people are going to tell her that she's the one. So you can see why if Aegon had this dream and then these things happen, it's like, well, it's all coming true. He had a dream of vague cold and darkness. He had a dream of the others invading. So there could be a connection here of he perceives the others and realizes the dragons are needed to stop that because of his dream. There's a 3-headed dragon in his dream, or some sort of phrase that pops up in his mind as he's dreaming that says the dragon must have 3 heads, or he reads about that somewhere, or both. It's very telling. The sigil has a lot more meaning there. It's also a prophetic device, not just a thing that matches who they were at the time. Because it's the prophecy would be the reason why they made such a big deal out of that. It'd be like, hey, this all aligns exactly like dreams and books and or visions tell us. This must be happening. It must be real. It must be us. So it's a good theory in my mind that Aegon also had this 3-headed dragon dream thing that much later Rhaegar read about, or maybe also dreamed about. And for all we know, this was written down by Aegon himself. That would be a wild little thing to find out, like that this survived somehow. Baelor didn't burn it, and that happened. So this is actually a recurring possibility for a lot of the Dragon Dreamers, is that they think they're the ones, or they're dreaming of their own descendant or relation farther down the timeline and thinking it's themselves. That's part of why that works so well. Dany thinks she needs 2 men to trust. That's a thought she has. 3 against the world. Here's her thought. Like Aegon and his sisters. But who would they be? She thinks about it like, Darium, nah. Jorah nominated himself, and she's like, nah. Maester Aemon's like, oh, I should be one, but I'm too old and frail. He says that to Sam. So if Sam and Daenerys ever meet, well, that's something they'll talk about, or you would hope so. Maybe Sam is too afraid to bring that up, but it's quite an icebreaker. Like, hey, I knew your great uncle. What is Aemon's relation? Yeah. Anyway, and he had a lot of information for you. Rather than just whatever his familial connection is, his information is far more important, and it's hard to predict because Dany will have come a lot farther along in her knowledge by that point. This is openly discussed during A Feast for Crows in the first chapter, in the prologue, by the companions at the Quill and Tankard. Alleras says some kind of not self-defeating, but she kind of contradicts herself a little bit in a funny way. She says, I'll tell you what I suspect. And then she says, the dragon has 3 heads. But that's not a riddle, she says. I was like, what? Yes, it is. And you're the Sphinx. Of course you're speaking in riddles. So that's all like, wait a minute. Come on, Alleras. You know that's a riddle. It's a phrase that no one knows the meaning to. So yeah, that's maybe not technically a riddle because it's not asking a question, but it is definitely like a thinker, like a puzzler. Like, what does that mean? And she doesn't elaborate. So yeah. So Rhaegar brought it up. Dany hears the phrase in the House of the Undying, drink from the cup of ice/fire, 3 heads has the dragon. All these phrases. Melisandre doesn't say anything about a 3-headed dragon, neither does Benero. So the Azor Ahai myths don't bring in a 3-headed dragon thing. That's something that comes from just the Dragon Dreamers, as far as we can tell. Just from Aegon, just from Dany, just from Rhaegar, and Rhaegar may not have dreamed it. He may have just read about it. So where did it get written down? Who wrote that down? Is that text that Melisandre never saw? No one other Red Priest saw that? Well, that'd be interesting. And the way George expresses this, sort of like the ice and fire themes that aren't directly supernatural, but show us how he views them conceptually, elementally. A 3-headed dragon is hatched in Karth, is one of the rumors that gets floated during the prologue of A Feast for Crows. 3 becomes 1, other way around. Yeah, it's the way the rumors express. It's not a 3-headed dragon, but we see how the same conceptual thing happens. The rumor turns into a 3-headed dragon instead of 3 regular dragons. And maybe in the world of dreams, you could see how the same thing would happen. How 1 would be perceived as 3, or 3 as 1, or something in between. Again, the writers, Jon Snow and Aegon, I really don't know who else it could be. So this is a peculiar thing. Like a lot of people, this is one of the reasons Tyrion Targaryen has some legs to it, because just out of sheer lack of Valyrian potential dragon riders. It's like, well, who else could it be? So that's why it's lack of options that lead to some of these wilder theories, I think. So there's probably some missing information here that might maybe clear some of this up that we just don't have. Speaking of Jon, let's now consider his, for lack of better words, ice and fire dream. Quote,
Burning shafts hissed upward, trailing tongues of fire. Scarecrow brothers tumbled down, black cloaks ablaze. Snow! An eagle cried, as foemen scuttled up the ice like spiders. Jon was armored in black ice, but his blade burned red in his fist. As the dead men reached the top of the wall, he set them down to die again. He slew a graybeard and a beardless boy, a giant, a gaunt man with filed teeth, a girl with thick red hair. Too late he recognized Ygritte. She was gone as quick as she'd appeared.
So this dream has a notable connection to multiple other tales we've covered today. For example, the ice spider, scuttling up like spiders. That's the only other mention of it, of the ice spiders, other than maybe Sam brings them up in a book. So that's interesting, that connection. It's the last hero story, so that having a connection to Jon is interesting. The burning blade thing, that's what we learned about Lightbringers. It's supposed to turn to fire when it's in combat, which this dream is absolutely portraying. He kills a graybeard, a beardless boy, a giant, etc. It could just be Longclaw, right? But and then Dragonsteel from the last hero tales. How is this all wrapped up together? I don't know, but I think those are the elements we need to consider. So these are whites. He doesn't call them whites, but he says they're dead men, same difference. But he recognizes some of them. And I think this is a bit of foreshadowing, or reminding us that this will happen again. Ygritte's already dead at this point. But it's a warning of what's to come from any character. A lot of characters will find themselves fighting their own dead friends, or at least people they knew. Yeah, scary. Also, we're told, I briefly touched on this before, but one of Sam's chapters starts with, he was reading about the others when the mouse, blah, blah, blah. He was reading for like so long that he lost track of time. He thinks maybe it was more than a day. And he had a stack of books that he was reading. He was reading a book about Dragonkind. He was reading a book about the others. He was reading about the last hero. Very little of this comes out in his words later. So we have a lot of books that Sam has read that he hasn't actually like talked about or shared that information with anybody. So I think that's something George is holding on to for later. But it's something to keep an eye on, because Sam has a lot of knowledge that he hasn't revealed yet. And now he's at the Citadel, where there's just even way more knowledge. So what that could do is corroborate some of what he's already learned. He could find books that are like mentioning the same things that he's either witnessed in person or read in books at the Wall, which, as we've been told, the Wall has some pretty rare books. So that, and a substantial library on top of that. So a lot of potential there for some connections to be made for George to go a little farther with the written prophecies, or at least the written information by maesters long gone. Let's move from Jon to the foes he's dreaming of. And I don't mean the whites, but the ones sending them. The others. The others? As this is actually written. So some of the stories mention the others, but none of the prophecies do. How interesting is that? There's vague mentions of a great darkness, an overwhelming cold, that it's from the north. Dreams have them. Books have them. Stories have them. None of the prophecies do. Part of this is perhaps, or surely, because the others were not a worldwide phenomenon. The darkness was everywhere, was global, but the others weren't. The others were just in Westeros. Maybe Westeros might have gotten the short end of that stick. The entire hemisphere, if not world, got the long night. But only Westeros got the others. That is how it's worded in Old Nan's Tale, sorta. She says, in that darkness, the others came for the first time. Some of the texts say that the others brought the darkness with them, but she frames it as the others emerged in the darkness. The darkness is what allowed them to come back. Melisandre, like I said, didn't necessarily show any prior knowledge of them, but that doesn't mean she didn't have knowledge of them. Again, she definitely calls them the cold children of the great other. And now here is one of the first clues to any of this. We're going all the way back to the beginning. The three-eyed crow showing Bran what was far to the north. If we interpret this as Bloodraven, which I do, plus Bloodraven's knowledge that he's gleaned from the Weirwood Network. So this is Bran 3, A Game of Thrones, when he's in a coma. Quote.
He saw the wall shining like blue crystal, and his bastard brother Jon sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. And he looked past the wall, past endless forests cloaked in snow, past the frozen shore, and the great blue-white rivers of ice, and the dead plains where nothing grew or lived. North and north and north he looked, to the curtain of light at the end of the world, and then, beyond that curtain, he looked deep into the heart of winter, and then he cried out, afraid, and the heat of his tears burned on his cheeks. "Now you know," the crow whispered as it sat on his shoulder. "Now you know why you must live."
Why?
Bran said, not understanding. "Falling, falling, because winter is coming." Bran looked at the crow on his shoulder, and the crow looked back. It had 3 eyes, and the third eye was full of a terrible knowledge. Bran looked down. There was nothing below him now but snow and cold and death, a frozen wasteland where jagged blue-white spires of ice waited to embrace him. They flew up at him like spears. He saw the bones of 1,000 other dreamers impaled upon their points. He was desperately afraid.
Just the imagery there of this frozen wasteland of where the others may emerge from, where their home may be, where they first came from. The 1,000 other dreamers impaled on their dream points. That is creepy and evocative. And I really much appreciate how this is all coming back around. We've talked about so many different prophecies and predictions and foreshadowing. It shows how well connected a lot of this is. It also reminds you of what I said at the beginning, how pretty much impossible this is to piece together just by reading. Even if you've read like 3, 4, 5 times, there's just too much here, too much nuance, too many things that are kind of similar but not completely the same. Very hard to parse without getting into the weeds like we're doing right now. Melisandre's knowledge of the Azor Ahai and Lightbringer myths or stories, not to mention her obvious powers, they give her credibility at the wall. But when she brings up, the growing darkness, again, they know that already. They're like, yeah, we know. We've seen the others. We've seen the dead. But most people don't, even with prophetic knowledge, know that the others exist or even mention them. So that's it's being held off for some reason. Like Melisandre hasn't perceived Dany, and the Ghost of Highheart hasn't perceived Dany, and Dany hasn't perceived the others, and things like that. Is all these, so many people don't have really important missing pieces here. And that's going to be something that's very satisfying and interesting to read eventually, is when these things do come together. As the story started small-ish and spread out a whole lot, and then spread out more, and it's starting to come together because so many of the plot lines are starting to merge, slowly but surely. Now, who outside of the Night's Watch knows that the others are real and here again? There's a few, and for our purposes, it's an important sign, because the return of the others is proof that some of these things are right. Even though the others aren't in these prophecies, the darkness, the cold is, and that's a pretty clear indication of that. Like, well, these cold, evil beings emerge from the darkness. They weren't explicitly named in the prophecy, but that's clearly what's happening. This giant eternal darkness has arrived. That must be what the prophecy was referring to, or something like that. They are the cold darkness after the long summer, prophesied in the ancient books of Ahai, and carried forward to this day by worshippers of R'hllor and other groups. So even if the others aren't specifically understood, they are similar enough to what's named in these prophecies to be an obvious fit. The original darkness, let's think about this for a minute. The original darkness, we've theorized that it came from somewhere else, like The Shadow by Ahai is a very strong candidate. Or perhaps the others are where it first came from, and other histories backfilled with what they thought was the source. For example, the blood betrayal of the Bloodstone Emperor, we're told that's what brought the Long Night on. But that could just be what they believe brought the Long Night on. The Long Night happened then, so they blame it on the Bloodstone Emperor because he was such a jerk, such a cruel, supernatural, evil dude. But that's just filling in what they think they know. Perhaps there's other creatures of darkness, though, that plagued Essos. They didn't have the others, but they had whatever the 5 forts were built to guard against. Something like the others, maybe. They're certainly expressed as children of the Lion of Night, which that's similar enough. One way or another, the darkness of long ago enabled the others of Westeros to emerge, or maybe they created it. Either way, they came together. So if it is them, the darkness may be coming from, quote, inside the house, so to speak. They're the cause of it. Or they just know that this is the right time. The stars are aligned. The long winter is going to come because there was a long summer. They keyed in on that. They know. So they're acting accordingly. The others are like, hey, now's our time. They aren't responsible for bringing the darkness, but they will absolutely capitalize on it. And that asks us maybe one final question. Do the others themselves have something resembling prophecy, foretelling, ancient lore, or anything like that? If they are creatures of the old gods, corrupted creatures perhaps, but still, that would be their origin, creations of the children perhaps, then they might have some of that same ability. The children have access to the werewood network, or at least some of them do, the green seers. If the others were just regular humans converted to what they are now, then maybe they don't have foretelling or prophecy. But if they were green seers or green dreamers turned into others, it might take that to make another, if indeed that's how they're created in the first place, then it would definitely fit. If you have a green seer converted to another, then they might have some of their powers still. They clearly can still animate the dead and do other stuff. So why not that? I would love to see how this plays out, and this is hopefully something that will get revealed. Though I'm pleased with this episode overall, a part of me feels like some aspects of this episode could do with a lot more attention. It was a pretty big episode, so we covered about as much as we could or should, but it feels like some of these topics we only barely touched on because we were trying to look at it from a high level. We're looking at the high level connections, not necessarily some of the deeper cuts that are more harder to see. But that said, these high level things are pretty hard to see anyway. One thing I originally planned for this episode that I kind of moved past, but still want to do, is just going through the Targaryen dynasty, looking at each reign. As the Stannis Baratheon brought up earlier, and imagine Aegon the Conqueror in the light of the dream. How does his behavior fit with what we think he knows? We could do that with every possible Targaryen king and imagine, well, does this behavior indicate they know the prophecy or they care or not, or something other than that? Like, it's easy enough early on, like Maegor probably knew because Visenya probably knew and she would have told him. Aenys would have known because he was the one expected to inherit. Well, did eventually, or did inherit rather. So, like, Aegon, it's one thing for Aegon not to write it down, not to give it to any historians, but would he just not tell anyone? That seems super unlikely. And how would it even be possible? Why would George be telling us this? Where's the speculation coming from that George refers to if Aegon is the only one who knows? So that we can throw out the window. Other people had to know, if not just his sisters or Orys Baratheon or whatever, maybe some other people. Our own guesses are similar. Like, consider what the show did. The show the House of the Dragon built its own lore around these seedlings here, and it's pretty cool. I like some of what they did with it. But that's not relevant to what the books are doing here. We only care about what George said. At times throughout this episode, we've pointed out characters who don't know anything about any of the Song and Ice Fire prophecy. Like, again, Arya, Sansa, Theon, Cersei, Jaime, there's lots of them, some of the lesser characters. Barristan, he mentioned the princess that was promised, or prince that was promised, but he didn't display any knowledge of what that means. Again, there's even lots of characters who don't know Daenerys exists, let alone that she's some kind of prophesied savior. This is mostly, shall we call it, the political arc, the war arcs, the characters that are involved in the War of Five Kings, or the extension of that's still playing out. Like Aegon, young Griff. He has a lot to do with Dany's story, but probably not a lot to do with Dany's endgame. What's going to happen at the Wall with the others. With quite a few other characters, it's tricky, though. Brienne hasn't seen any whites or the others, and she has no idea who Azor Ahai is, but she's seen the dead walk. She saw Lady Stoneheart, and other Brotherhood Without Banners saw Beric Dondarrion walking around undead before Stoneheart. So at least some people in the South won't find it so far-fetched that the dead are walking up in the North. Everybody else will be like, that doesn't sound possible. That sounds like some crazy-ass rumor. But people who have seen the dead walk in the South, that might be part of why George is introduced to those plots to, help set up those characters for understanding or believing what's going on farther in the North. Either way, it's something very much to look forward to. Characters in the dark who finally see the light bringer or what have you. Characters in the dark who see the dark for what it really is. And everyone's seen the comet. So if people start telling them the comet heralded this change, they'll be like, oh, yeah. All right, yeah. Especially after seeing the others or the dragons. If you see that and then you think about the comet, you're like, oh, okay. And these dragons are young, aren't they? So the whole idea that they came at the same time as the comet, that's it's easy to perceive. It's easy to believe that to be true. And it might be true. Either way, so many different characters are going to go through the learning process for these prophecies, for one or more of them. Some of them will be very deep in it. Like Tyrion is barely in it now, and he's going to get thrust into the middle of it as soon as he gets Daenerys, I would assume. And there's other characters that meet that description as well, potentially. And for each one of them, it's going to be a ride, I think. So I'm excited for that. I expect their reactions to be compelling and for that to be a device for George to reveal more. Trivia answer. Who does Dany discuss the Song of Ice and Fire with? Ser Jorah, a man who knows nothing about it whatsoever, so it didn't get her very far. But it was an opportunity for her to air her thoughts out loud so we could all have something to think about as well. The poll results. Yes, the poll results. The question was, Dany sees a vision of Rhaegar playing his harp. Will Dany hear that song again in a vision or elsewhere? 74% of you said yes, and the rest said no. So there were 133 votes, so that's a pretty good number of people voting there. Speaking of voting, remember to go to our survey. bit.ly/how survey. One word, how survey. We would really appreciate your input there. It will help make the show better. And, well, yeah, that's it. It'll help make the show better, and we appreciate it. That's enough. Those are good reasons. In this episode, we mentioned quite a few other topics that we already have episodes for. The Red Comet. We have episodes on werewoods that are tangentially related. The Question of Quaithe, very related to this. The Ghost of Highheart episode, also very related. We have an episode called Melisandre Before Westeros, meaning her time, her young years, basically, absolutely related to this. And a similar episode on Maester Aemon, his time before going to the Wall. Very relevant here as well. We have several episodes on Bloodraven, but the most relevant is the Three-Eyed Bloodraven, because that details his time once he got to the Wall. Doesn't cover his time in the South at all. So that's very focused on just the northern arc of Bloodraven's life. We did an episode recently called The Book of Benjen Stark. Benjen in the north with the children and the dragon glass caches and other mysteries associated with some of this. Very relevant. Some of the last hero stuff relates to him a little bit, I think, if not more. We have an episode called The Curious Case of Cold Hands. You can see why that would relate to a lot of these things, including Benjen and the undead and the others. We have one called The Horror at Hardhome. That relates to Melisandre's vision that the cold brought by the others will be so severe that it ends the fires of the earth. It puts out volcanoes. That's crazy cold. And there's prophecy in that one. Not prophecy related to anything we've talked about today, but more prophecy regardless. Daenerys the Dreamer. The prophetic, the most powerful prophet of all time, possibly. Certainly of ones we know about. And the whole reason the Targaryen family still exists. We have an episode on Dragonstone detailing just mundane and the supernatural, how it was founded, secrets within, different people who have ruled there, obviously Targaryens. And an episode on Dany's birth, which is super important given her distance from her family, her early life, and how her birth actually reflects some of the prophecies as well, something we didn't even talk about today because there was just so much to cover. Thank you to everyone who came out today and watched live. We certainly appreciate if you catch us later as well, the edited version. That's certainly, we appreciate however you consume our content. Thanks to Nina for helping me through some of these ideas and giving me some specific notes as well to add in. Thanks to Joey Townsend for the music. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for the videos and maps. And on behalf of Ashea, I'm Aziz. We'll see you next time. You know what to do. Until then, Valar Areretus.